Well, we have now made it to the end, finally. After traveling around the state, we are now at our last meeting here in Rome, Georgia. We're glad to be here. This is a study committee that is put together for the funding of transportation. As we've said from the beginning, there's nothing off the table. Everything's on the table for us to look at. We will consider everything. And we have traveled to 7 other places, and now we're here in Rome, Georgia today for the final meeting. I'm going to, first of all, recognize my fellow House members that are here today from this area. Representative Tarvin, Representative Lunston, Representative Kelly, and also I'm not going to recognize Ms. Dempsey just yet, and I guess I'll even recognize Senator Hufstetter. Did you know he was here?
I haven't seen him yet. Is he in surgery?
He's right
there. Oh, there he is.
I've been here before you.
We've taken a scenic tour of beautiful downtown.
I wasn't going to say anything, Senator. You're right. You actually made it here on time. We decided we're going to get you a new watch now that you're whipped.
I was here on time. I was following others.
But at this time, I do want to recognize a very good friend of mine. She has done an outstanding job in this area, and I know that she needs no introduction. But Representative Dempsey, we're going to recognize her for a few opening remarks.
Oh, well, thank you. Good morning. Good to see all of you. Good to be home. Some of you know I've been away because our family was blessed with twin granddaughters in Macon on the eve of the election. So I've probably been in Macon about 5 weeks now, but I did zip into town just for this because this is so important. I want to thank this committee. I want to thank you for having your final meeting, one of the most important ones here in Rome, my hometown, but also just for the courageous conversations and great work that you've been participating in. I think this is the 8th meeting, is that right? So some very interesting conversations. Back in about, I guess it was over 10 years ago, Governor Perdue then appointed me to serve on a transportation task force that was a similar conversation, some of these same things that are going on. I was there representing our city as a city commissioner. The challenges may be a little bit bigger now, but there is a lot of similarity in the conversation. So I look forward to what the committee will put forward in its report and some of the bold steps I think it's time for us to consider as a state.
Thank you, Ms. Dempsey. As always, you do a great job of representing this area, and we thank you for your leadership. Would any other reps like to have anything to say? All right. That's good. Well, he spoke before you got here. Nah. We actually have a little fun with this as we've traveled around the state. Senator, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I'll be brief, but I certainly want to welcome everyone here, and certainly Senator Beach and Senator Gooch and Senator Harper that are in the body with me. Senator Gooch sits in the far left corner of the Senate. And the only one but he votes far right. That's right. But the only one that he gets to sit next to is me, so he has to put up with me quite a bit. But now that he's been elected our majority whip, he may abandon me back there. I'm not sure, but he's been a champion of transportation, and certainly Senator Beach and Harper have as well. And I welcome them to this town, and I know they've had a really tough job, and we'll certainly await the results of what they do. I do want to mention, of course, we had a little bit of a tragedy here with the Beckhart plant yesterday, and fortunately everyone got out safe, which is the good news, but we do have 225 workers, many I've known since high school, that are going to have a future that is uncertain at this point, and our prayers are certainly with all of them. Again, thank everyone for being here, and I do appreciate all the hard work you've done across the state on this, and look forward to the report that you deliver to us.
Thank you, Senator, and we thank you for your leadership. And it's probably a blessing, that you don't have to sit next to Senator Gooch anymore. I'm about tired of it. I hadn't had to sit next to him but for 8 meetings here, so I can only understand what you might be going through.
Get a little closer.
You don't get the mic.
No, I was just trying to get closer to you.
Oh, yeah.
You
No.
don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Don't let them give you a hard time. I had to sit near them for 10 years.
I'm sitting between two house members.
We got you squeezed in. We'll keep you straight today. With that being said, again, thank everybody for coming today. Thank you, Rome, Georgia, for hosting us. We are glad to be here in your city today, and we're glad to, as I said earlier, for this to be the last one. With that, we're going to start with Mr. Buzz, Rome County Commissioner. City Commissioner.
Could you introduce who your members are in the?
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I'm glad you said that, Representative Tarver. We usually do that. Let's start. Let's start with you, and we'll go around this way. Everybody, introduce yourself. I know we've had several of those of y'all who were here yesterday. We've had several that couldn't make it today, had other meetings they had to go to. So,
But I mean, from there around is on the committee or?
yes,
They're committee members.
yes.
I'm Representative Steve Tarvin from 2nd District, just north of here.
Katie Dempsey, Rome, Floyd County.
Trey Kelly. I represent all of Polk County, a little corner of Bartow County, and northern end of Harrelson County.
Eddie Lumsden, District 12 of northern and western Floyd County and all of Chattooga County.
Chuck Hustetler, Senator out of Rome, representing Floyd, Bartow, Gordon, and Chattooga counties.
I'm Tyler Harper, and I represent the 7th Senate District in southeast Georgia from Osceola, Georgia, Irwin County. I have 10 counties, so I cover a lot of area down in southeast Georgia. It's a pleasure to be a member of the committee, and I look forward to our last day today.
And I'm State Representative Jay Roberts from Osceola, Georgia as well, and I represent Irwin, Ben Hill, Turner, parts of Tifton, and parts of Coffee County.
I'm Steve Gooch from Dahlonega, 51st District. I represent parts of Forsyth County and all of Dawson, Lumpkin, White, Union, Fannin, Gilmer, and half of Pickens.
And I'm Edward Lindsay. I'm a former state representative. I think I'm the representative also on this committee from inside the perimeter of Atlanta. I represented Buckhead and Sandy Springs for 10 years in the State House.
I represented Mark Hamilton, 24th District, representing the citizens of Cumming and Forsyth County, not too far from here.
Nice.
Been at all 7 meetings. Look forward to this one being over so we can really get to work to determine what we're going to be. My new phrase is I'm all in. And I want to compliment Rome in that we finally, the committee is going to be allowed to sit and look forward at a screen versus having to turn our chairs around and look behind us. So I appreciate, Katie, I'll give you credit for this, for doing that. Thank you.
Brandon Beach, I represent Senate District 21, which is North Fulton and Cherokee County.
I'm Steve Green, former chairman of the Georgia Port Authority, past chair of the Georgia Chamber, and I'm the citizen appointee from Lieutenant Governor.
Chris Clark, I'm the president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. I'm appointee.
I'm Dave Williams with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Hayla Modelmog, our CEO, is a member of the study committee, and we have a board meeting this morning. She is probably en route. She'll be here later this morning.
I'm Kevin Little, chairman of Walton County and president of ACCG.
And I'm Tom Gale with the Georgia Municipal Association, filling in for Lamar Norton, our executive director. We represent the 536 cities across the state.
Calvin Smyers, state rep from Georgia. I'm from Georgia, from Columbus.
We're out of Georgia.
I'm thinking about somewhere else. Yeah.
And the Dean of the House.
The Dean of the House.
Okay. With that being said, Mr. Buzz.
Walkstetter. Usually it takes me 15 minutes to say my name, so those in Rome, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and let me introduce myself and tell you why I am concerned about transportation. I am an elected city official here in Rome. I'm a city commissioner. I would also like to recognize Commissioner Bill Ermsher, who is here attending this morning. Bill, glad to see you. I have long been interested in transportation, the needs of our community and of our region. I currently serve as chairman of the Transportation Policy Committee of our MPO. and I'm a member of GMA's Transportation Policy Committee and the Transportation Committee of the Greater Rome Chamber of Commerce. Transportation, I realize, is the heart of economic development and the only way that our cities and our counties are going to grow and continue to operate, so I am vitally interested. First and foremost, though, I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the city of Rome and, of course, on behalf of Floyd County to Georgia's Rome. I understand you have said that this is the last of your meetings and how great it is that you finally reached the last. And I'm sure it is because you've reached the best in terms of venues.
We saved the best to last. You're
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And we welcome you. And hopefully you've had a chance to look at our city a little bit. And if not, if you have a few minutes after the hearing, we would love to show you Rome and all of the features that we have. We are the city of Seven Hills. And also, transportation has meant a lot to Rome. So we can show you some of the things that we have partnered with GDOT and been able to accomplish. Let me preface my remarks by saying there's no easy answer to our state's need for transportation funding. The advance of technology has removed some of the good old friends of revenue production from our marketplace, and it's now incumbent upon each of you to become a Svengali and peer into the far future of Georgia and come up with a revolutionary new way of meeting the needs of our citizens for decades to come. Transportation is the key to our economy in Georgia. Take this from one who is from a community that has no direct connection to an interstate highway, and a possible solution that has been tied up in studies and litigations for well over 30 years. It's most difficult to convince a new industry to locate here when developers have a hard time just trying to get to our city and get lost on the way. And this does happen here in Rome. There's no doubt that the current method of financing transportation in Georgia no longer meets our requirements, and the prospect of our current available avenues of dollars shows that we will soon be in a critical situation if we're not already there. Georgia has long prided itself as leading the nation in maintenance and working with its cities and counties in providing local aid that provided us with great systems of interconnected roadways that moved not only our people, but were definite factors leading to the economic growth. Sadly, this is no longer the case. Because of the inadequacies of the current funding sources, our cities and counties have been forced to move to what I call Band-Aid maintenance. Gone is the hope for a suggested regular revolving paving program because of a lack of funding and the inability of our state to offer a partnership. These are the facts that are haunting you as a committee and us as government leaders on the local level. Georgia has long been, but can no longer be, dependent on the gasoline tax as our primary source of funded construction and maintenance dollars. Local governments are asking our citizens to pass SPLOST-type taxes, the referendums for prospects, because we can no longer depend on what used to be conventional funding help. But the citizens are not too happy with this kind of concept alone. Local governments are not new to putting skin in the game. That is, if we can sell that program to local voters. That's the purpose of SPLOST and other local optional taxes. But the citizens are getting mighty restless about approving increased local taxes, and it's incumbent that we must work out a new partnership with the state of Georgia to make these local referendums more attractive in the future to our electorate. And speaking of locally improved votes and sales taxes, please let me make one point perfectly clear to you, and hopefully you will pass this on to the members of the General Assembly. We would oppose any excuse me, any methods of trying to divert any portion of locally passed taxes to any other source rather than local taxes. Local means local. And we would hope that you would reject any suggestions that any portion of SPLOST, ELOST, LOST, any parts of those taxes be diverted for any reason to anything else than local funding needs that will be selected by local governments. Let me throw into the mix the hybrids, the new breed which has significantly diminished the need for motor fuel, and natural gas vehicles that don't need any motor fuel at all, and the new electric cars with huge storage batteries that in many cases need just a tiny little fuel tank to get you to the next charging station just in case you pushed it a little far and you're running low on your battery. See, all of these new type of vehicles are coming on the market, and we as a state and as a country are offering tax incentives for people to buy them on one hand, but on the other hand, what are we doing? We are taking away the revenue that was being produced by conventional vehicles that use motor fuel to provide taxes for maintenance and for new construction of things in Georgia. I respectfully call on you to develop either an excise tax or an annual fee on no or partial petroleum vehicles. They are users of our highway system and must contribute to the construction and maintenance. Enough crying, though, on my part. What else can you do with our support to make a change in our state? I suggest looking at major new highway construction on a pay-as-you-ride basis, or possibly look back at toll road concepts. This could be fully state, federal, or could be a private-public partnership. But those who are using the new or reconstructed superhighways will help pay for their construction and their maintenance. Once the cost of the construction and the establishment of a maintenance reserve for that project is established, any excess of funding should go to the Georgia Department of Transportation for the preservation of our current highways and our bridge network in the state, as well as special projects that are needed on the local level. With all due respect, there should be no discretion by the General Assembly to appropriate these funds in any other way. This idea of funding just expands on the idea currently in the Atlanta area right now for charging for the high volume lanes that people are using and are accepting. If it's working there, we should look at this as a possible funding source for statewide. The General Assembly of Georgia should adopt a 1 penny sales tax statewide with no convoluted exceptions, and it should be dedicated by a constitutional amendment to go directly to the Georgia Department of Transportation. This, in my opinion, should be in addition to any other new sources of funding mechanisms. This should be added to the revenue produced by the new construction funding mechanism to further aid in the maintenance and development of the primary and secondary road systems in Georgia. This is a valid concept proposal because everything that you sell has to do with transportation. If there wasn't transportation, there'd be no goods and services for people to sell. So a sale is a sale, and it's dependent on transportation at its beginning, and it should help fund transportation now that we are in a deep need. Anyone who believes in long-range transportation planning regulations should believe that regulations should be crafted that encourage local governments to implement future transportation needs met partially with local funding excuse me, through SPLOST or some other type of local tax, referendums, and assistance from GDOT and with federal funds. With this type of skin in the game, citizens would know their needs that could be met with a significant contribution of GDOT funding. This could be based on existing formulas that are already in place. The partnerships between local governments and GDOT are already there. So this is no new science. We've been working with it for years. We can continue to work with it. We've been partners. We want to remain partners. We have not been adversaries. We don't want to be adversaries. We want to work hand in hand and bring everything together and go down those new roads and hopefully to the future of Georgia. The Georgia Department of Transportation should continue to be very proactive in the aid given to local cities and counties in the general maintenance and preservation of the local roadway networks in our state. We like programs like LMIG and other programs that have proven so far that they're working and that they are prosperous for both our government and for the state. I haven't really mentioned federal dollars much, and there are a couple of federal folks here because it's hard to predict what the new Congress and what's going to happen with the funding sources. So I would ask that the members of the General Assembly, through this commission, lobby in Congress for Georgia's position to be improved when it comes to federal taxes that are sent to Washington. The donor status needs to change because our demands need to be met. So what I'm asking you to do is please, if you would, use your influence to lobby with the General Assembly to go ahead and ask that that formula be changed and more of our money that is sent to Washington be brought back locally. Thank you for this opportunity to meet with you. We hope to work together with you and implement some new funding sources. We would love to be your partner and to advocate on your behalf with our members of the General Assembly. And I'm glad to see our delegation here today, and I compliment them for the work that they have done for this community and they continue to do for this community. They're a supportive group, and I know your constituents support you too. So some of these are unpopular things, but it's time to stand up and do what we have to do. And I conclude, and if there are any questions, I'll try to answer.
I think you're going to have a few questions.
Well, that's okay.
I mean, and I didn't mean, I know there's a couple down there that want to, but you do have a great delegation here, and they do a wonderful job representing you in Atlanta and y'all's interest. And we thank you for coming today. With that being said, I know Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, I guess the first question is a clarification. Are your comments, are they from you personally, representing the city of Rome, or because of your affiliation on transportation of GMA, a statement from GMA?
These are in no way a statement from GMA or the city of Rome. They are mine based on my experience working in the transportation area for our city, for our area up here, and working with members of the General Assembly at various years trying to lobby for the passage of different things.
Well, and the reason I asked that, I'm glad to hear that's your answer because, and Mr. Gale probably knows where I'm going with this, we had ACCG yesterday at the final presentation talking about the openness and how nothing was off the table, everything was on the table, but yet I heard you make some demands of what you would oppose. And so I just want to clarify as to your opposition to certain things, whether they would be from you as a person or through ACCG. And because I consider those adversarial comments, yet you're talking about wanting teamwork. And so I just want to clarify that. I'll also correct you on one thing that you state. After lots of, we are not a donor state. We love to say that we are, but we're not. We actually receive more money back from Washington than we did. Now, there is a large disparity between what we send and how it's funded, but Georgians have said that for many years. At one point, we were a donor state, but at the present time, we actually do receive more dollars back from Washington than we send there. Unfortunately, they're borrowed dollars. Yeah, it's borrowed dollars, but actually, Georgia does receive that back. So,
in fact, there's no state that's a donor state anymore.
Right.
Yeah, just because they're borrowing. Because we are borrowing.
In response to your comments, I just question the word demands because I don't see anything I said as a demand except to ask that
the word
local
was opposition. What you would oppose, and not giving the General Assembly the discretion on certain things.
Can I be perfectly frank and honest with you, sir?
Please.
Absolutely.
Right. The General Assembly, in its wisdom, has moved certain funding mechanisms that were for cities and counties, or have frozen certain avenues of taxation that were available to cities and counties. And without the support of the cities and counties, and that we are just trying to say, we jokingly say sometimes when we meet with our delegation, which we do regularly, please don't help us too much, because sometimes things have cost us sources of revenue. So not saying that we want to be adversarial, but what is local, please leave local and let us handle the local portion. Where monies that are available to us under the current law locally, whether it be, and I think specifically on the different type of sales taxes, the sales tax referendums that are imposed by our local citizens. They are imposed by our local citizens with the knowledge that 100% of that money collected, with the exception of the small portion that's given to the retailer as their part in the collection process, will be returned back to our community.
And I'm aware that there's history there. My point is, this is our 8th meeting, and we have tried to remain very steadfastly open to every possible scenario. And I realize that there's things on this committee that have come out that we have done, such as the fourth penny, such as the bonded indebtedness, that are causing some of the potential problems. So we're trying to put everything on the table. And I'm very aware of local funding. You may be aware that Forsyth, everybody on this committee certainly is, because I've talked about it at every meeting.
Really?
But Forsyth County just passed a $200 million bond, of which $81 million of local taxpayer dollars will go to state projects immediately, because the state simply does not have the money to do that. And so that is a true partnership, and that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to encourage. So I do appreciate your comments on the partnership and working together, because I'm 100% convinced that we will not solve this problem, and it is a major problem in my estimation, unless we are able to come together in a consensus-building way. And in fact, my guess is everybody will have a little pain is the only way we're going to solve this.
I'm sure.
If we try to go one particular area to solve this problem, I don't think it'll happen. So I think we're all going to have to do that. And so we look forward to working with the cities and the counties and all the citizens, as well as businesses across the state, of finding a appreciation. So I don't mean my comments to be adversarial either, but I just encourage everybody to continue as we move forward to understand that there's no sacred cows out there in this solution. So I appreciate your comment.
Well, thank you. And it is one that vocally went around supporting the T-SPLOST, or TIA, whichever way you want to say it, which unfortunately did not pass. We look for all avenues. But, of course, being in a local elected, we are very cautious about monies that we currently have that are taken away from us, and we have relatively only one other way to make up for it. And we have cut since 2007, 2008, we've drastically cut. And about what's next? Police and fire? Well, after that fire we had last night here in Rome, we can't do that. So We have a funding problem just like you do when you try and pass an appropriations bill.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
All right. Mr. Doug Hooker, where are you at? There he is. Okay. With the ARC. Mr. Doug, we appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having me.
Taking time to come up here today, and we understand you got to try to get back, so we want to indulge you. You have a PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Which one is it?
Everybody on the committee, I just want to, throw this out there. These mics are always hot, so. Not saying anything, that you would say that you wouldn't want everybody to hear. Just understand they're always hot today, so.
We were just commenting, Mr. Chairman. We didn't.
I wasn't referring to you by any means.
We were not aware of what had happened in Pike County until you mentioned it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah, you've done a good job plugging that. I want to make sure. All right, Mr. Doug, thank you. Mr. Hooker.
Chairman Roberts, thank you so much, and thank you all members of committee for giving me the honor of standing before you this morning. And speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors for the Atlanta Regional Commission, we want to thank you for all of your hard work in trying to address this very serious question that's important for Georgia's future, not just Metro Atlanta's. And we know we're all in it together, so we appreciate everything you're doing there. I wanted to start by acquainting those who may not be familiar with the Atlanta Regional Commission that we are one of 12 regional commissions, of course, throughout the state. But we wear multiple hats. In the blue on the slide there, you'll see the basic regional commission counties that form the ARC from Cherokee on the north to Fayette on the south. But we're also a federally designated metropolitan planning organization, which means federal funds that flow into transportation in the region. We coordinate with GDOT and with Greta to help work with counties and cities on how we apportion those funds for projects needed in those areas. And in the MPO role, we're required to cover an area that's in non-attainment as stated by the EPA. So you'll see in the beige the additional counties that we work with. Chairman Little from Walton County is one of our members on our Transportation Air Quality Committee, a very faithful member, and we appreciate his service there. So we're here, of course, because we're very interested not just in City of Atlanta or even in the core Atlanta, but the broader metro Atlanta area when it comes to transportation. And that population, as probably most of you know, is most of the population of the state. But more importantly, Georgia and Metro Atlanta together have established an economic dominance in the Southeast, and it's a prominence that we certainly want to maintain. And one of the things that we know is that we have to keep our infrastructure, particularly our transportation infrastructure, well and expanding to meet our needs, not only for people but also for freight and other goods that move and services that move through the region. And so we need to do what we can to be more urgent in how we address those needs. Recently, the Metro Atlanta, the ARC took a poll of over 4,200 residents in the 10-county region. We call it our Metro Atlanta Speaks. We did this survey last year, did it again this year. We'll continue to do it into the future so we can help our local policymakers see how Metro residents are perceiving different aspects of community over time. We ask questions about what do they think our problems are, what do they think our opportunities are, how do they like their communities, how they like public education, things of that nature. So it's about a set of 25 questions. We ask the same questions this year that we asked last year so we can track how people's feelings change over time, their perceptions. And when we asked the question this year, the question we asked, what is the region's biggest challenge? And the clear winner was transportation on most people, and you'll see that about 24% of the residents responding picked transportation over issues of economy or crime or public education. And so that says to us that people are very aware of and feeling the need to do more about how we address our transportation issues. And if you look at it on a county basis, it actually stays pretty consistent. Of the 10 counties in the core region, 7 of the 10, the majority, or I should say the plurality of respondents picked transportation as the issue that they were most concerned about or think that the region needs to face. And we're going to make a copy of this presentation available to you afterwards, by the way, so you can see it. Okay. So we were trying to be sure that we not only knew how people felt on a regional level, but how do things vary from county to county as well. We asked the question, how should the region address some of its traffic congestion? Of course, the one thing about traffic congestion, it suggests a level of prosperity, right? So it's a problem that there are parts of the country that would love to have more of a problem, but still, too much prosperity can also be a weakness for us. So when we ask the question, how should we address traffic issues, put more money into highways, put more money into transit, put more money into developing communities where people live closer to where they work, things of that nature, the clear choice was putting more money into transit. And that was the same response, at almost the exact same percentage that we got in last year's survey. So this is a fairly consistent feeling, at least for these 2-year periods. And again, on the county level, if we look at we asked the question, how important is transit for the future of the Metro Atlanta region? And we were really shocked by this response last year because it came out as over 70% of respondents in the region felt it was very important, and that was their characterization. So when we asked the question again this year, we actually were expecting to see a little bit of fall off, but instead we saw that was very consistent. Over 70% of the respondents, of the 4,200 people we surveyed, said that transit is very important for the future of the Atlanta region. And when we break that down on a county level, it was fairly consistent even by county. So probably not unexpectedly, Clayton County had the highest votes, and of course that probably was reflected in their recent vote to join the MARTA system. But even with counties like Cobb and Gwinnett at 68 to 67% of respondents believing that more public transit was important for the region as a part of our growth and how we address traffic congestion. So why is transit important at all? We live in an age, and I think everybody's probably maybe getting a little bit tired of hearing it, but millennials, young professionals that are now beginning to enter the workforce, have different choices about things than we did. I'm a baby boomer, so I'm probably with many of you in the same age cohort. And I can remember when I was 16 or 17, first thing I wanted to do was get a car. Now, my mom couldn't afford a car for me, but that didn't stop me from wanting it. And by the time I was 18 and I got off to college, first thing I looked to do is try to get me a car. But that's not their choice now. For many of them, they'd rather take transit or in some way not have to deal with owning a car. And that's showing up in the rates of car ownership. The Automobile Association of America, in doing a survey of young people in high school getting their licenses, said the number of seniors in high school between, I think it was 2010 and 2013, the number of seniors who had a driver's license dropped from 85% to 76%, and it continues to drop as they survey that. So the young people don't want to own cars at the same rate. They don't want to drive at the same rate that we did when we were growing up. And this map here shows you basically the concentrations of where median ages are throughout the state, and the concentrations in red being those areas that have the highest concentration of younger population, so younger communities by and large. And you'll see most of these are basically in the more urban, more metropolitan areas of the state, which is probably no surprise. But interestingly enough, when we ask the question, because one of the things that we do as part of the Regional Commission is also work for aging services for the 10-county region. And we ask the question, several questions around the issues of aging. What is the biggest challenge of growing older in metropolitan region? And this is all respondents saying that transportation, or 26% of all the respondents saying transportation is the biggest challenge for growing older in metropolitan Atlanta. And if you actually break that down and look at the age breakdown, and we can supply that information if you'd like to see it, it goes up the older you are. So older people see this at even a much higher rate, but even younger people see that a challenge for getting old in our region is being able to get around in transportation. Of course, as we get older and either desire not to drive as much, especially around Atlanta with all of its challenges as you might imagine, or are unable to drive as much. If we don't have access to good alternative modes of transportation, it gets more difficult to do the things we need to do as we get older. So that was interesting to see that. I won't go into this at length, but basically this just shows the areas of the state where we have older residents. In this case, the red, deeper red represents older versus blue is younger, which is the opposite of the previous slide. So you see 65-plus concentrations are higher in the north and the south of the state, and some around metropolitan area, metropolitan Atlanta as well. So we're all facing the challenges of how do we help citizens as they get older to be able to be independent as long as possible. And transit is certainly one of those options that we have if we can get more investment and more reliable investment in transit around the state. Wanted to point out something that you may be aware of already, but in the Metro Atlanta region's long-range plan, this is the 19-county 25-year plan, if federal funds don't fall off anymore, and of course there's no guarantee of that, but if they don't go down significantly, right now we're looking at about 71% of our long-range plan are projects just for maintaining the system as best as we can, and this, of course, is for GDOT's work in highways as well as the county's work maintaining their local county roads and city roads. And only a quarter of the money that we currently see available to all of us in the metropolitan region is available for expansion of the systems. That's new roads, intersection improvements, any minimal transit expansion. So you know, it's billions of dollars, but if you think about it over a course of 25 years, it basically breaks down to just a couple of $1 billion a year, and most of that overwhelmingly is going to maintaining the system and not giving us the ability to address any issues or needs that come about with growth. So we're doing some good things with the money we have, and we're very proud that we have greatly improved our relationship with Department of Transportation and with Georgia Regional Transportation Authority, working much more closely with them. And for the last 2 years, basically before and up through the referendum vote, but more intensely after the referendum vote, we've been really honing down on how to make the best use of the dollars that we have and have developed some good policy guidelines for how we program priorities in different pots of money. So we're very, very happy to see that GDOT was able to move forward with the managed lanes projects and I-75 north of the perimeter and 575, and then I-75 south of the perimeter. And of course, very excited about the governor's effort working with GDOT and Greta and others to advance the redesign of the 285 and 400 interchange. All three of those projects are going to mean a lot of new mobility options for Metro residents, but it's very, you know, that's a good start, but it's far from what we need to do in the region. Also, too, being able to make some progress on important local roads. State Route 92, we just had a groundbreaking with Chairman Tom Worthen and Mayor Harvey Persons of Douglasville just a couple of months ago. And folks in Douglasville and Douglas County have been working on this project for over 30 years. And they were so elated when we had that groundbreaking to know that they were finally get started. But it's not important not only for Douglasville and Douglas County, but for most of the residents in the West Metro area. A lot of citizens in Cobb County and in Paulding County also use this road as a critical commuter road each day. So glad to see we're making some progress there. And of course, the City of Atlanta is soon going to start its streetcar into operation, and very excited about that. But with all of that, we still have a lot of work to do. We have a limited amount of funds available to go through for projects that are currently programmed up till 2019, which is our TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, which is the short-term transportation program. A lot of these projects have a good bit of local investment in them, and we hope that if federal funds don't fall off the map, that we'll be able to get started on many of these improvements that are very critical for the overall life of the region. I-285 interchanges on both east and west side of the metro area. State Route 9 in Forsyth County, where Representative Hamilton knows that one very well. Highway 316, a critical artery between the Athens and Atlanta communities. And we're going to finally get started on being able to get rid of some of the at-grade intersection problems there. So, and that will greatly improve safety as well as the mobility in that corridor. But we have a lot of projects still that are in the long-range plan for which we do not have a certainty of funding. Some very critical things that we feel important for the community overall to be able to, again, meet many of our growth needs as we continue to expand in the region. And I won't go through the list of all these. And like I said, we'll make this presentation available to you after so you can look at it at your leisure. But we have a lot of things that for which we have absolutely no identified funding whatsoever that are still very critical to the future. And I might point out that I-285, the Stone Mountain Freeway interchange, is a very critical thing. People who live in DeKalb County know about that as well. Certainly, Mayor Tomlinson in Columbus, Mayor Rickard in Macon, and Mayor Jackson in Savannah have all expressed the desire at some point in time to have a commuter rail connection between Atlanta and Savannah. And Mayor Reed, of course, has been talking about, with the growth of the port and the deepening of the harbor there, the idea of being able to improve our mobility for passengers between Savannah and Atlanta with some form of commuter rail. So those are things that would be nice to have, but obviously we don't have the money for those now. But how do we address critical transit and rail needs as well as all of our highway needs is a part of the question that we hope that you will continue to ponder as you come up with a recommendation for your colleagues. The last thing I'll point out is that the Atlanta region is woefully behind. I say the Atlanta region, this is for Georgia as well, but the Atlanta region is woefully behind a lot of our competitors in the nation in terms of our annual investment. And I picked out these three metropolitan areas because they tend to be areas that we constantly are in competition with for companies and for growth, jobs, as well as young professionals. And these numbers represent, these percentages represent their annual investment in just expansion, capital improvement, not maintenance. So that says Dallas is basically spending 280% more than what we're able to program in Metro Atlanta. Denver 300% more, and this is annually for being able to expand their systems both in highways and in rail. And in all three of these metro areas, they have extensive rail networks that are also continuing to expand. So with that, just want to thank you once again for the opportunity to present some thoughts before you. Very much appreciate your work and hope that you will come out with something, as Chairman Roberts said, that's bold and comprehensive and meets the needs for all communities, both in the highway side and the transit side. Thank you, and I'll take any questions you might have.
I don't know if I got two of you waving at me. I'm going to Mr. Lindsay, go ahead.
Thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate you sort of articulating some of the problems, particularly in Metro Atlanta area where I come from. There's a question that we ask everyone who comes and does a great job expressing all the problems that we're having, and is what I'd like to hear is some suggestions on what you think we ought to be doing, because we've got to present a report to the legislature that doesn't just tell them the problem. We've got to make specific recommendations. So
certainly,
by the recent estimates we've seen from DOT, we've got to figure out where to find somewhere between $1 billion to $1.5 billion more per year.
Right.
What would you suggest we recommend to the General Assembly? I want to give you that opportunity.
Okay. My first suggestion is that you look at how to diversify the revenue sources as much as possible, not try to get everything from one place.
Yeah.
Because I think the diversity of revenue sources, whether it's sales tax, whether it's some kind of motor vehicle license, additional license fee, whatever you feel is politically acceptable for your colleagues, I think diversity is the most important thing to keep in mind, because obviously, the economy swings from year in and year out, and different revenue sources will lag that swings or not be as affected by some of those swings. So first of all, I would encourage you to think diversity. Obviously, the fourth penny, if you're willing to give it back to transportation, it will be an important source, but not a very big source. And but this is a situation of every little bit counts.
You're up 180 million. Now we're going to get the rest.
Well, I'll have to work on that with Mr. Lindsay. I didn't come prepared.
And I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's fair.
You are
fair.
one of the experts on the area, so we're just looking for ideas at this point.
Well, you're going to hear from the Assistant Secretary from Virginia, and the state of Virginia later on today, I believe. And we've been looking a lot at the Virginia model. I think there's a lot to be said about some of the things that they've done. Now, it doesn't translate directly to our situation in Georgia, but I think there's a lot to be learned from how they approached it, taking a variety of approaches. And one thing that I will say that they did in Virginia that we would love to have if we could get it is they did something statewide. Several things statewide, but they also did some things that met specifically the needs of Northern Virginia to give the Northern Virginia communities the ability to generate additional money that stayed just in Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
So the rurals didn't have to pay for Northern Virginia's needs. Northern Virginia didn't have to raise money that went out. I mean, everybody had statewide things, but they also gave Northern Virginia the opportunity to do some things just for Northern Virginia's needs, more intensely urban and more. They needed more rail and transit in their communities, and so I think you'll hear some of that later on today.
Appreciate that. Also, just as another real quick question, we often hear that Charlotte keeps trying to nip at our heels. Do you know the same figures that you gave us for Phoenix, Denver, and Dallas? Do you know the figures for Charlotte?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get that number and get it to you by the end of the day.
I'd be kind of curious.
Okay, we'll get that for you by the end of the day.
Mr. Hooker, thanks for being here, and thank you for what you do for the Atlanta region.
Thank you, Senator.
On one of your slides, you said that the survey came back, the residents want to expand public transit and invest in public transit, 42% of that were surveyed. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I'm not against spending more money on transit infrastructure, but before we do that, what are your thoughts on us making sure we coordinate our current assets? I'm a firm believer that we have a very fragmented system in Metro Atlanta. You've got Cobb doing their own thing, Gwinnett doing their own thing, Martin, 2 counties, Clayton now is coming into the fold, and then Greta kind of goes all over the place, and they don't really communicate. Do you think we could see some efficiencies if those 5 entities would come together and try to be coordinated on a regional basis and then start spending on infrastructure?
Senator, they're going to shoot me for saying this, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. We have to find a way to get those systems to be under a unified planning jurisdiction, a unified administrative jurisdiction. I think we have a lot of inefficiency in how buses are routed in the region and how buses are maintained. We could probably do without as many, maintenance garages and things of that nature if we had a unified system. Everybody doing their own thing is a fractured approach that ultimately doesn't serve the customer well and the traveling public. And what we're after and what you're after, of course, is how do we serve the traveling public as best we can. So I would agree with you. I'll probably get some flack from mine.
And the other thing I would say to you, you mentioned the millennials.
Yes, sir.
The millennials want transit.
Yes, they do.
I'm advocating the baby boomers are going to need it. So
yes. Well, and that's what we see. That's what we see show up in this survey, both last year and this year. So, and that's what I'm beginning to tell folks is that, based on the evidence that we have, baby boomers, or a lot of babies, not all of them, but a lot of baby boomers and a lot of young millennials, young professionals, want the same kind of community, and they want to be able to access the community with more walkability and more transit, and so yes, that's a growing need for both generations. Thank you, sir.
We're done.
No other questions?
I just kind of as a follow-up to Senator Beach's question, the debate when Clayton County Commissioners were deciding to move forward with a ballot initiative to join MARTA centered around whether or not they would move forward on a half cent, and they eventually decided on a different approach. The Greta bus system, the Cobb Transit, and the Gwinnett Transit, they're borne by not a sales tax as a revenue source, but by just some general operating funds of those counties and the state. Do you see a potential for a debate, a sales tax debate, if there were to be a ride ATL concept put forward that could allow for the replacement of general fund property tax revenues in Cobb, Gwinnett, and a way to also fund state Greta services through some sort of sales tax mechanism that may involve a half cent, such as or a fractional percentage of sales tax, such as they do in Denver, which you cited earlier.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I understand. Do I see the potential
see
for
that
a debate?
as a debate
as
or
an option?
As a potential option that may need to be considered into the future?
Well, I certainly think it's an option that would be considered. But obviously, each county leadership is going to respond to that a little bit differently than others. I think you would see that the Cobb leadership is probably a little more reluctant to go that route for right now because it's clear that their electorate's not ready. Gwinnett may be ready to debate that in a few years. But I think they would like to have the option, and I think that's more than anything else is that local elected leaders have to determine when's the best time to enact the options based on what they hear from their voters. But I think they'd like to have the option so that when the time comes for them to debate that in their communities, they know that they have something they can access. So I think it would be better to have the option.
I agree.
All right.
Thank you all very much again. I appreciate
the job you do. Thank you so much. All right, Mr. Bob Siegel. All right.
This one right there.
All right.
Advance button. That one? Okay. There you go. All right, good morning. My name is Bob Siegel. I am with Verizon, and I'm here to talk to you about a program going on in the state of Oregon that Verizon is heavily involved with. I understand you heard in detail about the program yesterday from CH2M Hill. CH2M Hill worked with the state of Oregon to set all of this up, to plan this program. Verizon's role, on the other hand, is we are the people that have responded to the Oregon RFQ, and we are going to actually be executing the program. So I'll tell you a little bit about that today. I want to talk very briefly about who we are, what is telematics, that often confuses people, and who is Verizon Telematics. I will go very briefly over the road usage charge and what that is for those folks who were not here yesterday. And then finally, I'll go into some detail about this program. Please ask questions as I go along. I'm fine with questions afterward or while I'm doing this. Before I go any further, I want to quickly introduce to you my two colleagues that are here. Bob Davis over here, if you have questions, any follow-up, he's your contact. And then Kristen Unicki, who tried to escape right before I introduced her. Kristen works with us on remote emissions, which is something that is an extension of what we'll do in Oregon. So it's something very exciting. You don't have to go to an emissions inspection station. It's done automatically. All right, very quickly, Verizon Telematics. We're from Georgia. We're formed in Atlanta in 2005. We have over 900 employees working in the U.S. here in Atlanta, some also in China and Europe. We've got a lot of business there. We do telematics for Mercedes-Benz. We do fleet telematics for very small fleets, all the way up to some of the largest fleets in the world, including, of course, the Verizon fleet. And then we do something called usage-based insurance for companies like State Farm and Towers Watson. And that's where all of this comes from. We provide companies like State Farm with a device that they send to their customers if their customers feel that they're good drivers. This helps State Farm measure the driver's ability as a driver, measures whether they're a safe driver. So they give them a discount. So are any of you State Farm customers? Anybody here on the program? Okay. Do you participate in Drive Safe and Save? Anybody? Nobody likes to save money here? That's
I know
not-
they all go.
We just don't drive where we'd save money.
I wouldn't.
There you go, okay. All right. Telematics, folks. A lot of times when I talk about telematics, I see people's eyes sort of roll up into the back of their heads. It's a little scary. That's what, that was my reaction when they first called me about this job. But telematics is really not all that complicated. It is the communication between your vehicle, your car, your truck, and the rest of the world. And you need that communication to improve your safety, improve your gas mileage, improve the way you run your car for navigation, entertainment, information, a lot of valuable things. Very quickly, what a road usage charge is, and if I confuse anybody, please ask questions. Simply put, you've all heard about how the state is running out of funding. Okay, we're getting low on money. It's because of, quite frankly, people like me. I drive an electric car. I love it. Okay, but I don't pay any kind of a tax for the maintenance and construction of the roads that I'm using, and it's not fair. Now, all of you are picking up, all of you that drive gas cars are picking up a piece of what I'm using. You're paying for my use. And I appreciate it, thank you very much, but it is not fair. We're costing a lot of money. My car is just as heavy and takes up just as much space as any other car. So the state of Oregon, as many of you heard yesterday, is leading the country by putting in a road usage charge. They're going to have their citizens pay for what they use by the miles that they've driven on the roads, not by the amount of gas they burned. So they're not going to charge somebody who buys gas for their boat a road maintenance fee, but then again, they're not going to let people like me get away without paying for my fair share. And the technology that we have today enables this, okay? And I want to say, I'm not here to advocate for this type of a system. We're not here to advocate for a road use charge. What I am here to advocate for, and what I'll consider success today, is I left some material up here. I left this presentation. I left a few booklets, more detailed booklets describing the Oregon program. And I also left 2 copies of the business card of the guy in Oregon who is running the program. His name is Jim Whitty. And my goal is to have somebody from here set up an official contact with him. Okay? Have him call me back and say, hey, Bob, Georgia actually called me today. They're involved. Because he is running an 11-state commission, the Western Road Usage Charge Commission, that is spreading this information around. It is leading in the development of this. And there's also a lot of other states that are paying attention, that are interested, including, by the way, Florida and New Jersey and a lot of other major states that are looking at these programs very carefully. So let me tell you what this is, what I'm showing you right here. It plugs in. I'm going to step away from this microphone for just a minute. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I usually project fairly well without a microphone. This is a device right here. It's not terribly sexy. It plugs into what's called your OBD port. All right, it's underneath your dashboard. If you have a car from 1996 or sooner, just plug this thing in. Did they show you this from yesterday? Okay. That's all this is. You plug this in, and our device, we have a GPS, we have an accelerometer. We also have a Bluetooth chip, and there's a cell phone in here. It's a cell phone chip. All right? Part of what I want to get across here is, and again, I don't want to advocate, but I do want to make sure that you feel what I'm talking about. This is not just about funding for the roads. What I'm here to talk to you about is launching Georgia into the future of the connected automobile. All right? Now, to get this thing out of my pocket, apologize. This device right here connects via Bluetooth to this device right here. Okay? When you have this, driver is in an accident, we know about it. It's got something called the accelerometer. We know you're in an accident. We call your car before you can even call us. We can three-way you to the emergency personnel. We have their lat and line, so we can get the exact location of where that vehicle is. Okay? It's not just, I've been in an accident, I'm on 75 North, I think I passed exit 331. It's exactly where it's coming. Then, or if, it doesn't usually happen, but if you get to this button before the emergency services call you, this is a single button directly into emergency services. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned, we can ask you a question in the middle of this. Yesterday we saw a presentation, if I'm not mistaken, referencing Oregon on a number of different options from $45 a month on a 3-month option to, and saw all the various options. But one of the questions that was asked that was unanswered, and maybe you'll give us a better guesstimate. Let's talk about the cost. As we look at funding, you've got to realistically look at what the cost is, and I see great technology. There's a cost of the technology, and then there's also the cost of auditing, making sure people are complying, and creating a larger government process to do that. Give me some perspective of that, and let me throw out another option. If you say all that, you drive an electric car, why don't we just charge you $250 a year on your title fee? And so we know we get $250, and we have no auditing. We have no need to track it and that type of thing. So I'd like to throw that out as an additional option to compare in there.
Okay. So let's start with why don't you do...
Because, by the way, we've already given you a $5,000 tax credit in Georgia, and we're allowing you to drive on the roads paying no motor fuel tax.
So a couple of points on that one. Number one, yeah, why don't you charge me? Okay, it's a very good question. My question is back to you. Why don't you charge me?
Well, I think we're going to solve that. I think we'll solve that.
And, Mr. Chairman, in fact, it was so easy, I think 250 is too low, right?
Yeah.
This program that you're running, we've been doing some marketing research. And one of the things we found is people in general, drivers in general, would much rather pay for their actual use than for the flat fee that you're mentioning. And I would too, because my commute is fairly small. So I want to keep it at least in line with what I would have paid in the pump, which is what Oregon is doing. Okay? So I think, yeah, in the short term, a flat fee is easy. You don't have a lot of problems.
Well, now, yesterday we heard Oregon, and I've been to several seminars and all on this Oregon plan going back a couple of years, but yesterday we heard $45 a month is roughly what they're paying. Is that correct?
For that was a 3-month option.
Yeah, that's a little high, it sounds like.
Well, that's what she said. Excuse me.
Yeah,
she said that there, as they rolled out the various options, that one option was a 3-month option, and so you'd pay $45 a month for 3 months.
$45 a month flat fee. I thought you meant $45 to get hooked up like that.
No, they were actually estimating part of it too, though, was at a monthly charge. That's what they were about, what it was coming out to.
Yeah, $45.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the cost is. I understand yesterday their response to
because it was $500-something is what it come out to.
And they said an awful lot, and I disagree with that assessment. I think I will tell you that the state did not blink at our bid for doing that. And you can get
well, that's Oregon.
That's Oregon. Okay. There's a lot of development that we're doing that Oregon is funding to cover.
What is that cost that they didn't blink at? That's what we're trying to get to.
I can't give you the exact cost. You can, if you'll talk to Mr. Whitty, he's allowed to give you that cost. I'm not enabled to give you that. You're not in the millions of dollars to set some kind of pilot up or something. It's not cost. And in time, the folks offset some of this.
unless that's part of it.
Good question.
I'd like to ask, is
Absolutely.
Oregon funding their roads through this?
They're going to launch a pilot in July.
What happens when people in California are going to go to Canada and they don't pay anything? Or they still pay a gas tax, or they
They'll
don't
still
pay?
pay a gas tax. The way this is going to work, and I'll cover this in just a second.
Okay.
But the way that this is going to work is we'll collect the data from this. And by the way, am I okay that being? Yeah, okay. I don't like Tony. So we'll collect this data.
Which one they go?
We will multiply the miles in the state by 0.015, and then we can, through this device, we can measure very accurately the amount of fuel that's used on the roads in that state, and we'll just subtract the amount paid at the pump. Make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you subtract, if I've got that in my car, you subtract that from my gas tax I pay at the pump.
Yes, that's correct. So we'll net that out. So if you currently have a high miles per gallon vehicle, you get above roughly 20, 22 miles per gallon. You'll actually likely get some sort of credit from the state. If you're below that, I'm sorry, you'll actually pay. If you're below that, you're likely to get some sort of credit from the state. So if you're driving a big truck, you'll likely save some money. Well, let me pass this. You haven't seen this. Let me pass this around. Okay, and just as some examples, I mean, we can add value to our customers because we're able to collect vehicle miles. We do stolen vehicle tracking. We have all kinds of records of vehicles being recovered that were stolen from this. We can do vehicle speed alerts, so you can watch your team drivers and know if they're speeding. I have 2 team drivers. It's a nice thing to have. You could put something in place called a geofence. So I can block off certain areas where my kids can go and act on. So my daughter right now, she's 15. When she gets her license, I'm going to put a geofence around every boy's house in this town.
We're away from town.
All right. Briefly, what Verizon's doing, I'm going to do this very quickly for the folks who were not here yesterday. They launched this project in July of 2015. Our role will be to measure the miles, collect the data, bill the customers, do the collections of that money, transfer that money over to the state. They've conducted 2 pilots before this. If I'm going too fast for folks who didn't hear about this yesterday, please ask questions. They have a limit of 5,000 vehicles at the low level. They want to split it roughly between low mileage and high mileage vehicles.
It's a Senate bill.
And they're using multiple technologies, which is something that your question touched on. We'll be the high-end device supplier. They're also looking at devices that just record mileage, and they'll also do just a flat fee for anybody who wants that. Questions there? All right. So now getting into more specifically what we can do. This is something that I use to present to the state of Oregon. This is an existing customer. By the way, this person has been blinded at the front end of their trip and the back end of their trip, so nobody can tell who this person is, and that picture of a car is just an example. I apologize, it's a little bit of an eye chart. You can see here that we can follow what this driver is doing very accurately. So for those not familiar with Portland, Oregon, it's very similar to Augusta, for example, in that part of the metro area of Portland is in the state of Washington. So you want to charge those people when they're at a certain point across the bridge going over the river. Okay? Same thing we have here. We can track this very accurately, so we know where you are within about less than 2% range of air. Okay? We can even, that eye chart, I apologize, that's divided up by counties in each state. So we heard earlier about problems with local funding. Local groups could actually have funding work their way. We could set up special charges based on counties and things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Just sort of a basic question. You know, not that any taxpayer in the state of Georgia would ever cheat, but what's to prevent them from simply unplugging this?
We know when you've unplugged it, because we can tell the time, we can measure when the last connection is. And so when this is used for insurance purposes, obviously people do unplug it because you're going to get repairs done on your car. You get an emission inspection, the guy's got to plug in, or your battery's disconnected, something like that. It does go out. So we have to have a certain allowance, but obviously, from the insurance company's perspective, if you're unplugging that thing every Saturday night about 8 o'clock, you start to wonder fairly quickly what's going on. And the same will work with us.
Same will work with the
Yeah, so conceivably you could cheat once in a great while and, say, hey, I'm getting my car repaired. But if it happens too often, then we get rid of you, we bump you over to the state program. The state is going to have its own program for the people that don't want to go with a corporation or don't want to pay properly and are still in the program.
Thank you. I was just curious.
Okay. Any questions? All right. So I'll go on to this next one here, give you a little more detail. One of the points that we made to the state of Oregon is we're already doing this. We have many millions of miles, and I'll show you the miles we have already in Georgia. These are the miles we have a lot of vehicles already in the state of Georgia. So we did a little report for them to show them we could do this. All we did is we looked at some of our vehicles. We picked 30 of them. We were able to tell make, model, and year. So if we want to get flexible in how much we charge per mile, heavy vehicles or old vehicles get a certain rate, we can do that. We captured the total mileage, the mileage in Oregon, the mileage in Washington, the miles in other states. We captured the fuel used. We captured the mileage. We did the multiplication. We showed how much they would be charged or how much they would be credited. Okay? And again, for those of you here, this is on a handout that we can see now. Questions? Okay. A couple of examples of case studies. This is what we have in Georgia. I actually learned this morning that 74 million total driving miles, I apologize, it's actually old. It's actually 94 million driving miles. We have that right now in the state of Georgia. Okay. We're actually working with some Georgia groups and finding ways to use this data in other forums to help with the transportation system. 94 million miles already. Just one example, okay? I took two vehicles here. Again, these are anonymous vehicles. You don't know where they started. You don't know where they ended. This is broken out by counties, and also we've got outside of Georgia. This person is in Savannah. They do the vast majority of their driving outside of the state. This person is in Atlanta. They still have a sizable amount of driving outside of the state. But we've divided this up by counties to show that it can be done. Just two examples. Questions here? Okay. Very quickly,
Excuse me.
my colleague here.
So it's possible that car in Savannah, for example, that spends much of the time out of state, could be filling up every single time in South Carolina or Florida and not currently paying any motor fuel tax in Georgia then, is another thing. Just because they live in Georgia doesn't mean that they're paying for, just as other drivers from other states buy in Georgia. So,
right.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question, because that is, number one, that's what happens along the Washington-Canadian border, is now the Canadians come over into the U.S. to buy their gasoline. It's also the reason why Oregon has formed that Western Road Usage Council. They want to try to get as many states as possible onto this, because then when you start going into those issues of who's buying where and what like that all goes away. Okay? And you just get down to straight pay for what you use, don't pay for what you don't use. Okay? One of the benefits, and something my colleague is working on, is remote emissions inspections. That's an added benefit to the things that we can do. Okay? I would love to not have to take my 2 gasoline cars in for inspections periodically. a very beneficial program to the state. It just feeds remotely through our data. A couple of other things. This is a sample of what the driving looks like. You can monitor your kids, see your miles per gallon, things like that. Set up a geofence I told you about. We can even monitor a vehicle's health because we get all the trouble codes and details. So we can help you, the consumer, maintain your vehicle. We can also help you, the state, encourage people to keep their vehicles in working order so they don't pollute. All right. This last is just an eye chart. This is primarily for the people who have got the details. This is how we describe the remote emissions chart. That's what I have. Questions? Final questions?
Any other questions from the committee? All right.
Folks, I encourage you to take a look at the business cards that I've left for you for the Oregon person. I encourage you to give them a call.
Could you not get the cost information from him and then provide it to this committee? This is 2 days in a row we've asked that question and nobody wants to answer it. Or can't answer it. Can't answer it. Excuse me. I'm sorry, sir.
Potential contract. If we did that, we want to bid it out. We probably pay for that service. So we may not get it.
I'd be more than happy to have him give somebody a call if you want to give me.
Bob, Mr. Chairman, Bob Davis here. Just want to make sure I understand the question. You want the cost of the pilot program that we did over the last couple of years, which was 30 people, and also the cost of the program that's going to be 5,000 people, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how much it's going to, if we go to this and try to implement it in Georgia, we're just trying to figure out, and, within a broad range, the term I used yesterday, a little bit humorously, was scientific wild-ass guess. But, basically give us some idea how much this is going to cost us. I mean, we're not going to hold you to the exact dollar figure. It would be helpful if we knew that to implement this was going to cost $10 million or $1 billion.
Including the auditing and processing and all those things that I'm assuming.
That's where the majority of your cost comes in.
Yeah.
In those areas.
Yeah, we're just trying to get a range. That's all.
Is there somebody that I can have him call to go over the cost? You want to give me a contact?
Abby. She'll get with you.
I'll get you my information.
Okay, very good. I will.
She don't do a whole lot. She needs something to do.
No.
Dang. I'm just playing.
You're going to pay for that. You want to retract that now, Mr. Chairman?
No, not while she's here.
Any other questions? Yeah, if you get further down the road on this, we will be happy to put together a detailed cost estimate for you.
We're just, as we look at this in short time frame over the next few weeks, we're just trying to find out. Is this $1 million or $1 billion?
Yeah.
It's a lot closer.
I understand.
Yeah, I know. You know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm still a citizen here. I still have to watch out for them.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right. Mr. John Lewis. I skipped him. I was wondering. I don't know. I was trying to get us.
Hello, everyone. I'm not the John Lewis, obviously.
Spell it different. J-O-N.
You are to your mama.
Members of the committee, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Jonathan Lewis. I'm head of transportation planning for the city of Atlanta, and very much appreciate you all taking on this important, extremely important issue for Georgia, for Atlanta, for Metro Atlanta. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a 14-year resident of the city of Atlanta, but all my people are from Georgia, from Jefferson County. Does anybody know where Jefferson County is? And Louisville, and its claim to fame, of course, is that it was the state capital before for Milledgeville. So Georgia is very important to me, and I really appreciate everything you all are doing to help and improve transportation in the state. As the Port of Savannah is deepened and expanded, that's going to present an incredible opportunity for Georgia, for Metro Atlanta, and we are excited about the opportunity to have a increased freight presence in the state and strengthen our position as an inland port and logistics hub in the state and in the region and in the southeast. Of course, to remain economically competitive, the transportation is a key concern, and congestion in Metro Atlanta is a key concern. When we speak with Invest Atlanta, our development authority, Metro Chamber, a lot of companies considering locating in Atlanta, of course, are concerned about congestion, and we believe that state leadership on this issue will help make us more economically competitive. So thank you for your time. In the city of Atlanta, we have a tremendous maintenance backlog, and that was mentioned by our first speaker. We estimate it to be close to a $1 billion deferred maintenance on our streets inside the city. The LMIG program is helpful, but only allows us to invest in 5 to 10 miles of streets per year. And in the city of Atlanta, we have 1,600 miles. So when streets need to be resurfaced every 20 to 30 years, we're just continuing to fall behind. We invest about $28 million per year in maintenance, and we did a study a couple years ago, and that number really needs to be up at around $100 million per year. So in order to maintain a state of good repair inside the city, we have a significant funding shortfall. We are working inside the city to tackle that problem. We're exploring options to expand funding for maintenance. We're working to issue a $250 million bond next year to make a significant down payment to reinvest in our streets. But over the long run, we also believe that any options that you all consider as a committee will focus not only on new infrastructure in the state, but also on maintenance and state of good repair. Next, I'd invite you to, as you consider a bold and comprehensive transportation solution that, as Mr. Hooker mentioned, explores a diverse array of funding options that not only provides new capital funds, but also works on the demand side of the transportation equation. So I was actually going to highlight the Oregon pilot program, so I'm glad they were here, as one of the potential solutions. And the City of Atlanta does not have any specific positions, or I'm not trying to advocate for any specific solutions, but I did want to mention several types of options that other states, our competitors, are exploring or have implemented. And so one is that demand management. One is the VMT, the Vehicle Miles Traveled Base Registration. In Europe, they use vehicle weight as a factor in their vehicle registration fees because obviously heavier vehicles cause more wear and tear. Other options are to expand or index the gas tax so we don't have to worry about the erosion of that fee over time. Another option that some communities have explored is having a parking fee or a parking tax. And then expanding camera enforcement programs. Presently, our local governments can enforce red light violations, but many communities also have the opportunity to use cameras to enforce speeding in school zones, I know has been explored recently, and right on red violations and those kinds of things. So there are lots of ways to make the legislative agenda, the package that you all consider, have multiple funding streams. but also create some opportunities inside the city of Atlanta to allow local governments the opportunity to raise additional revenues. So as Mr. Hooker mentioned, in the Virginia example, in Northern Virginia, they have opportunities to expand funding, and we would certainly appreciate that opportunity. It's also important to mention that inside the city, we have several pennies that have been assigned through local sales tax, and while we support new funding sources, a diverse array of funding sources, we are concerned about the question of reassigning some of those local pennies to the transportation option. In part, just to make sure y'all are aware, we have, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but we have bonded against those pennies. So we've issued bonds in the market and are depending on that revenue to pay those back. So just as you consider to explore options, I hope you'll take that into consideration. Mr. Hooker mentioned that in Metro Atlanta, traffic has now become the #1 concern among residents, and that it has finally gotten back to its place of preeminence above the economy. So we've moved past, the economy is still a top concern, but traffic has gotten back to the top. And he highlighted this, but I just want to reiterate that that inside Metro Atlanta, folks are interested in reinvesting in roads and highways, of course, but there's actually greater support for investing in transit, and also a significant support for reinvesting in our older parts of our already built-up areas. So that would, of course, include the city of Atlanta.
What's your budget a year on roads and bridges?
Our maintenance budget is $28 million. Our capital budget is basically zero. So do you know what you collect off of motor fuel tax from your local sales tax? I do not know that, no, sir. But I'll be happy to get that for you. On our LMIG allocation amounts to several $1 million, which translates into 5 to 10 miles of streets each year. Mr. Hooker and I did not coordinate our comments, but he said a lot of the same things I want to talk about. And one of those is that baby boomer generation and millennial generation are really in greater numbers looking for opportunities to not drive. And so that's an important point inside the city. We attracted most of the millennial generation that in the past 12 years that moved into Metro Atlanta is actually located inside the city of Atlanta. And so for us, it's an economic competitiveness issue that in order to compete with places like Denver and Phoenix and Charlotte, it is extremely important for us that we are investing in walking and biking and transit. Before taking over transportation planning for the city, I worked for 5 years in the Atlanta Beltline project. And along the east side of the Beltline, has anybody been able to take a walk on the East Side Trail? It's pretty interesting what's happening over there. It's a 2.2-mile-long trail and has attracted approaching $1 billion in private investment, almost 1 million square feet of office space. That's 2 Bank of America towers. And about 5,000 new residential units are all locating along that trail. And it's really also major companies like Athena and data companies are moving into Ponce City Market. And talking with Jamestown about the Athena decision to move to Ponce City Market, they said the direct access from the trail into the building was important for them in making the decision to move in town. And so because they want, as a healthcare company, they want the opportunity for their employees to be able to walk and bike to work and make a healthy transportation decision. So my last point is that as you explore options, that I hope that, and it's very important for the city, for Metro, we've heard this from all of Metro Atlanta, but especially inside the city, that the funding, new funding, be able to be spent on bicycle and pedestrian projects as well as roadway projects. We need a comprehensive solution that explores that part of the transportation equation as well. So, my points are that we leverage the port, that we strengthen our economic competitiveness statewide through a significant investment in our roadways, our highways, our freight infrastructure to move goods not just out of the port but throughout the state. That we support maintenance and state of good repairs statewide, especially in Metro Atlanta. That I encourage you all to put together a bold and comprehensive package that funds all modes and makes a significant reinvestment in our system. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, John. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
All right. Dr. Catherine Ross, Georgia Tech.
Pretty smart.
So I can operate it, right?
That's it?
That's good. Well, good morning.
Morning.
It's a pleasure to be here again. I did have the opportunity to speak with the committee in Macon, so I added a little more information so you wouldn't have seen all of it twice. And of course, let me again just thank you for the opportunity, and as I said, for the work that you do, which I think is so critically important to the continued success of Georgia. With that, well, I want to take a bit of a different approach in this regard and really sort of take you at a higher level and then bring you down to look at our state. And some of the new information that I pulled together when I knew I have another chance to talk to you really focuses on Georgia. So we have been in partnership with the U.S. Department of Transportation for about 7 years now, because they're worried too. We've got a lot of competition globally. New markets are operating in spaces that were uniquely ours. And so we have been fortunate to have worked hand in glove with them to take a national and a global look and to figure out how we need to position ourselves to be competitive in the global economy and to make sure that Georgia stays competitive in the U.S. Okay, so let me start by talking about what influences transportation now, or drivers of change, if you will. Certainly population, and Doug talked about that. We can look at places like China. I was in Seoul, Korea last week, and you see that the population obviously drives transportation. The whole globalization is changing how we think about it. We finished a project just a little while ago looking at the deepening of the Panama Canal and what it would mean for transportation and freight on the eastern seaboard. And so Jacksonville is rolling up its sleeves to get involved. Now, they're not Savannah, but deepening that port's going to make some new winners. It's going to put some people in the game that were outliers. And so the whole idea is that this whole globalization impacts what we do locally and how successful we are. Of course, federal policy, the environment, technology. I was struck by the conversation we had earlier relative to Verizon's equipment. I would just offer that technology changed when I walked from my seat up here. And so the idea that we have the technological fit here is, I think, ambitious. Economic growth. I say to my students all the time, transportation is economic development. It's hand in hand. And so I would like to make that observation with you as well. So I want to move along and not take too much time. One of the things we figured out is that globally and within the context of the Southeast, this whole concept of mega regions, which is sort of connected cities, is exactly what a number of people have talked about. And we've been quite fortunate here to have the state of Georgia be the center of sort of the southeastern freight shell, if you want to think about it like that. They represent a new way of thinking about American transportation planning and a new tool that makes us competitive when we talk to places like China and South Korea because they have this whole idea, too, of sort of connected regions and connected cities and making sure you can get freight and people between them and they can move around within them. So let me just very quickly paint a picture. About 10 regions really explain about 80% of our economy and our productivity. Now, they don't stand alone. In the Piedmont, Atlanta, and mega region with Georgia, of course, in the center of that, we talk about Georgia, Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee as that mega region. Of course, we look to California, New York, but I just want to acquaint you with the idea that in the new way of thinking about it, when companies come, they want to make sure they can go from Birmingham, Atlanta, and Raleigh. You know, so it used to be Atlanta, and now it's where else can I get to? Where else can I deploy my goods? Where else will my employees, can they move freely? Because they're global companies now. You know that. We have, used to be U.S. companies, now they're global companies, and that's something we have to keep in mind as well. We sort of pioneered this idea, and it's got a lot of traction. I'm really proud that it started here at Georgia Institute of Technology. So one of the things that we did, and I like to ask, people ask me all the time, well, why do mega regions matter? We've actually run the numbers on this and done population forecasts. And what you see is that if you look at the mega regions, those 10 areas, they're very small in terms of the overall geography in the U.S., only about 30%. The non-mega regions are about 70%. If you look at the population, 76% of our people live in those 10 areas or in close proximity to them. That's the kind of agglomeration you're beginning to see. If you look at employment, about 76% of all our jobs and employment are associated with, again, those 10 areas. If you look at gross regional productivity, 81% attached to those areas. Fortune 500 companies, no surprise, 92% because they locate where they can move, where there's transportation. That's why this airport is so important. I got on the flight last Sunday and landed in Seoul, and I never got off until I got to Seoul. Got on in Atlanta, got off in Seoul, Korea. That's what they care about. That's what they'll pay for, and that's where they're going to locate. The other thing that I would make that I think is really important here, look at our patents. 90% of our patents come from that's innovation, that's competition. Again, they're attributed to these areas. So I gave you sort of a Star Wars map, but this is a more graphic one just to sort of put these within the context of the 50 states which we're all familiar with. And of course, you can see Georgia, the Piedmont, Atlanta mega region. Think about Birmingham, Atlanta, Raleigh as a one economic engine, because that's kind of how the world sees us in a lot of ways. Okay, let me talk just for a moment about our region, the Piedmont Atlantic mega region. You all may not realize we are pipeline poor. When you talk about moving commodities, we don't have a whole lot of pipelines like the rest of the country does. So when you talk about moving fluids and gasoline and items like that, we're at a bit of a disadvantage. So you have to look at your transportation system strengths and try to develop your policies to support that. We're fast growing, and I would make the observation that that's why there's so much focus on the Southeast has been between Florida and Georgia and North Carolina and South Carolina. That's where people are moving. They've been coming that way for a long time. And it puts us in a command position, if you will. The infrastructure linkages, I referenced the international linkages, and also we have a great highway system. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. It snows a lot there, and the highway system doesn't fare quite as well. They've lots of challenges financially, as we all do, and so maintenance is a problem. And it's obvious to me when I leave there and head south how much better the highway system gets. I'm sort of biased that way. I'm used to having a good highway system, which we do have, as you know, here in Georgia. So let me push you just a little bit more. I've talked about Birmingham, Atlanta, Charlotte, and Raleigh as an economic engine. And think about if you add all those numbers up, how big that is. That's where we position ourselves in the global context, and that's kind of how they reference us. And I wanted to start you there in thinking about this. So how are decisions being made given what I've talked about and the fact that there's a changing environment and a changing level of competition? We never used to talk about global competition. We didn't care whether we wanted to move around, we wanted to go internationally, but now everybody talks about the global competition because that's the push. Those are the new markets, and that's what we have to consider when we talk about our funding decision in the state of Georgia. So how new investment decisions are made, the new decisions are made around mega regions, the old were around cities. Cities are a part of mega regions. They didn't go away. They just got more connected. So we're not talking about something that we created. It's been coming for a very long time. A little bit, if you look at the Piedmont Atlantic mega region and sort of look at where it exports to, if you look at it, Savannah really trades a lot with China, Charleston more with Europe. Those global connections are ones we have to keep in mind in terms of our competition, continuing that, and we get these new tankers in, of course, that we want to make sure that that kind of relationship continues. So just an idea, just to show you where we actually export to, if you look at our state from that perspective. Now I want to go back a little bit here. Okay. Diversity of transportation modes. One of the problems we have, we do a lot of work around freight, is that we get in the way. We got to use what we have more efficiently. Sometimes the problem is getting us out of the way. Trucks have to move. If freight doesn't move, we don't do very well. So we have to figure out how, in fact, we're going to give us some options so that we get the better use out of the tremendous investment we've already made in our highway system. So it's another way of sort of thinking about it. How can we do that? One of the solutions is to have different ways to travel, diversity of transportation modes. This idea of multimodal is sort of the new way of thinking about it. And the old way of thinking about it is obviously one mode. Sustainable development, new economies, I've talked about that, less efficient resources. What are some of our leading industries? Wholesale, management, administration, and waste services, construction, transportation, and warehousing. And warehousing is doing some very different things now. E-trade, Yahoo has flipped the whole freight and commodity issue. We do a lot of work on that. So now you have Yahoo actually opening up a physical plant in New York. And of course, Walmart is trying to get much more into the e-trade business. All of that will have tremendous implications for freight and where they decide to locate their warehouses. What's happening now is it goes from the manufacturer to your home. Cuts a lot of people out. Whole new way of planning to accommodate that kind of demand. So freight transportation is essential to mega-region economic strengths, and we, with our port, are a conduit for lots of commodities that move through Savannah, through Atlanta, and on to the western coast. And as we look at the West Coast desire to keep those big tankers coming to the West Coast, because that was the only place they could go. But when the Panama Canal gets deeper, they can come here. So there's a competitive issue around global and Georgia's continued competition. And here's what I added that you hadn't seen that I think is kind of new, and I wanted you to see. So here's a map of the United States, and let me just talk you through this color code very quickly. Red are areas that are going to lose population, and we've done this through the year 2040, done population forecasts. Gray areas, no change. Moderate gain, light green, and then high gain, dark green. So just a quick map. Then I'm going to take you to our state and let you see what happens. So here we are in our state, and you can look at it right now in Georgia and see what we have. And as you look at it, look how our interstates pretty much serve a lot of our economic centers, if you will, where the growth is. Very low growth, gray still, small, blue, moderate green, and again, high, a dark green. But here's what I want you to pay attention to. Look at those green areas now and ask me how well they're going to be served. Those are going to be areas of growth, and they're not all in Atlanta. They're not all north. And so the question I'm putting before you is we have to make sure those green, light, and dark green areas are accessible. The other thing that we've done is we put GPS data loggers on trucks because we only think we know where trucks go. You only know where they go when you track them. You put a GPS on them, and I can tell you exactly where they're going. They're going to some of these places. Some of these are going to be now new receivers. How are they going to get there? This is the piece that I added, Mr. Chairman, because we hadn't talked about that before. And I wanted to make the point, it's not just Atlanta, it's the state of Georgia that is the question, I think, in front of us relative to funding and our continued economic success.
Can I ask a question?
Please, I love questions.
What's the reason, and I'm glad to see it, but what's the reason for the expected gain down in, I would guess I would call Middle Georgia area off I-16?
One of the things that we did was to look at what kinds of commodities are moving on trucks and where they're going and where they're delivering them, and actually where population is projected to grow. And of course, population, we look at who, older, younger, births, deaths, and so all of that is reflected in its growth and reflected in the identification of those areas. Some of those are now, we've gave this report to GDOT, and they said, well, we didn't quite know. And the point I made a while ago, remember now, as I said, we put GPS data loggers on trucks so we know where they're going and we can track them. We used all of that to try to map this future because I really want to give you a more comprehensive perspective of the opportunities and the needs we're going to have if that kind of pattern does in fact occur.
I understand. I appreciate it. I was just sort of curious what's going, and I'm glad to see it, but what's being developed down in that particular area?
I don't know the commodity.
Other than these two gentlemen over here. Why else?
Nobody needs any other reason.
They want to live next to us.
I can certainly give you the commodity flow data on that.
There's another reason.
Other reasons?
Hey, that's all right. We got baiting in South Georgia.
No.
My question was serious.
No. No, my point is this. We have commodity flow data, so I can tell you what's being delivered. That would explain some of what's going there. I can tell you how many jobs are associated with it. I can tell you how much it's going to generate. So all of this has a lot of data behind it, and specific to the commodities that go there, that are actually being delivered. So that would be.
I'm glad to see some development despite the representation they received.
Well, we were struck by it. I did not anticipate this when we started.
Now, what does that mean?
Only that we didn't know where the growth was going to occur until we actually did the analysis. We have great representation. That's clear. It's the growth that was the question mark.
I'm the one who questioned. Thank you, sir. Is there a way that we could drill down, not necessarily today, but for those of us who are fascinated by that map, and I hope that you'll give us a copy of your presentation.
Oh, absolutely.
Drill down, I'm curious to see the helpful signs in areas that we've been worried about, whether or not they were losing jobs, but it appears that they're going to be potentially gaining jobs.
I think that's right.
Good. What can we do to help further that along?
We have that data. We actually combined our GPS data with the North American Industrial Classification System data, which tells you what commodities are being moved to what places, by how much we can associate it with a whole list of things like jobs, the kinds of things we care about. So we have that information. Let me just make a concluding comment, and then I hope I'll make one concluding comment and then an observation or two. Cities and places are actually jumping to be responsive in this global economy now, and I'm really concerned that we maintain our eminence not only in the Southeast but globally. And, our competition isn't Charlotte. It's in Seoul, Korea. It's in Shanghai. It's in South America. And our country and our state has to be prepared to meet local, regional, and global needs. With that, I'll stop and answer any questions. And again, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for your serious consideration of strategies for expanding funding in our state. It's why we've been who we are.
Any questions?
Just
go ahead.
Just sort of follow up a moment ago. I certainly hope that you can make a copy of this?
Absolutely, I will.
Because I found it, and I'm sure the rest of the committee members did as well, fascinating. I do thank you for your time, Professor.
Thank you. I'm pleased to do it. I work for the state of Georgia.
As always, that was great, Dr. Ross. We do appreciate that so much.
Good.
You did a great job. Any other questions for Dr. Ross? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to skip around a little bit now. I'm going to go down to Mr. Nick Donahue from Virginia. He's got some information for us, and we've heard a little bit. Chairman and I heard a little bit about it up in Washington, but we think it's something everybody needs to hear and listen to.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have a protocol issue. I didn't show up early like I was supposed to and load my presentation, so please deal with me for a second while we get that loaded.
Okay.
Here, but I appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to talk to you here today. What I'm really going to try and walk through is, I'm not from Georgia. I don't think I'm familiar to any of you all. But what I'm hoping to walk through is kind of Virginia's transportation program, the funding package we did last year, and some of the other nuances of our program that helps us realize that funding package in 2013. So while he's loading this, the first thing I want to say is we have a very significant transportation system in Virginia. We have an annual budget of about $4.9 billion there, and it is a multimodal program that we have in Virginia. So that money is used to invest in highways, roads, and when I say roads, I mean local streets and cul-de-sacs to a certain degree. We maintain county roads in Virginia. Thanks, sir. We also invest in passenger rail, freight rail, transit, aviation, and I didn't put this one up there, but we have a spaceport that we've had for the last 4 years that we've actually been investing about $16 million in annually to support some of the resupply missions to the International Space Station. But didn't think that was important today. The thing I want to get into, though, is
where's that money coming from that you put in the space program?
That comes from the motor vehicle fuels tax.
Okay, so it is coming from that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And so what I really want to walk through here is kind of the components that I think led us to the first passage of a major revenue source in 2013, which I want to highlight was the first time in about 27 years we had done a significant statewide increase in taxes in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And there were really a few kind of things that led us to finally crossing that hurdle in 2013. The first was we had tried so many times. And a few times we were successful and we enacted bills and we thought they were really going to solve the problems that we had, and they just didn't deliver as expected. So one of them was a bill that redirected a bunch of general funds from education, public safety, and other things. And the State Department of Highways went and programmed all the money, and then the General Assembly never appropriated it. So we ended up with a program that had billions of dollars in projects and a budget that didn't have the money to pay for them. We had another time where we created regional transportation authorities that we allowed to vote to impose taxes in two of our most populous regions, and the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. And we ended up having to return tax money that we had collected. And so we've been through this a lot in Virginia. We've also tried a lot of times and weren't able to enact legislation. So in 2006, we had a regular session, a special session, and in 2008, we had a special session. And in none of those were we actually successful in enacting a piece of legislation. One of the other things that we did is we also demonstrated to our legislators as well as to the governors that we were trying everything. We've looked at public-private partnerships. We've looked at design build. We've looked at infrastructure banks. We've looked at bonding. We had tried every tool out there, and it still just wasn't enough. And the final thing we did is we squeezed every ounce of efficiency that we could out of the Department of Transportation. So again, there was nothing there. And those, Mr. Chairman, are I think the key factors that helped us get through set the context that allowed a transportation bill to pass in 2013. There's a few components of that bill from 2013 that are equally as important as you all consider your work here. The first one is we didn't do all the tax increases at once. So many of the tax increases at a statewide level in the bill that passed last year phase in over a period of 2 to 4 years. And so it really kind of ramps up over time as it moves in. The other thing that's extremely important is we didn't just raise taxes. First, we actually cut our gas tax. The gas tax that is paid by drivers in Virginia today is lower than it was before this package passed. We increased other taxes to more than offset that, and we also redirected existing revenues from the general fund. So depending on your political perspective, everyone was able to see something that he thought was important. So some just wanted new taxes and fees. There's some of that. There are some who thought the gas tax was too high, so we cut it. some who thought we needed to better pay for transportation out of the existing state budget, and we did a little bit of that as well. Another thing that was really important here, and this one I really want to stress the importance of, is in our two most populous regions that have the greatest transportation needs and are home to our large port and our large airports, we at the state level impose taxes within those regions. And that's really important for two reasons. First is it allowed those regions to have certainty that some of the revenues raised for transportation there could only be used there. We can't spend those money in any other parts of the state. The other thing that did is because their needs were so out of line with the needs in the other parts of the state, the rural areas that didn't have as high of transportation needs didn't see the same level of a tax increase. And so that really created kind of a win-win for one, the legislators in those urban areas, and two, the legislators in those rural areas, because they both got something that they wanted to see come out of that. And the final component, Mr. Chairman, is it was a multimodal package. And so the revenues that were raised in 2013 support highway construction, highway maintenance, transit capital, transit operating, passenger rail capital, and passenger rail operating support. And so it's really a kind of a broad set of types of projects that met the varying needs we had across the Commonwealth. The bill, remarkably enough, passed with basically two-thirds margins of support in both chambers. And Mr. Chairman, as I move forward, or other members of the committee, please feel free to stop me and ask any questions. I'm here really just to kind of tell you our story. So please make sure if there's something you want to know about it, just let me know.
Thank you.
So again, it passed with two-thirds majorities in both of those chambers. The bill was anticipated to raise about $4 billion. Mr. Chairman?
Now the $3.94 billion, is that the incremental increase, or that's the total funding? Total.
Mr. Chairman, that is the total statewide funding, which is only about two-thirds of the overall money, and I'll get into the regional monies on my next slide.
You'll tell us how much of a, quote, increase, dollar or percentage it was.
I will do that math as I work through these other slides to be able to give you that percentage, sir. So within this, what we did is a few things. Again, we eliminated our 17.5-cent excise tax on gas and replaced it with a phased sales tax on motor fuels that's currently 3.5 cents, and this January will increase to 5.1 cents. In January, when we're at 5.1, that's still only going to be about 16 cents. So again, that's still a cut in the overall gas tax that Virginians will see. The other really important thing we did here with the sales tax on gas is we said that there was a floor in what would be considered the wholesale price of gas. So the tax is currently 3.5 cents, whatever the wholesale price of gas is in Virginia, unless the wholesale price drops below $3.10, in which case that's the floor. And that's really, really important because when we passed this bill, Mr. Chairman, gas was selling for slightly above that amount on a wholesale level, and it's currently selling for about $2.50 or 40 cents, depending on who you talk to in Virginia. And had we not put that in the bill, we'd be out several hundred additional $1 million today if we didn't have that provision. We also eliminated the excise tax on diesel and replaced it with a 6% sales tax on diesel that's collected again at the wholesale level. We then increased the statewide sales tax 0.3%, dedicated a portion of that to highway maintenance and the remainder to transit and passenger rail. We then shifted a portion of the existing sales tax that had been in place for years, 0.1%, over to the transportation fund and dedicated to that. And one of the biggest revenue raisers in this was a 1.15% increase in the titling tax in Virginia, and that is phased in over a 4-year period. As I mentioned earlier, that's only about two-thirds of the revenue that's included in this package. So fully $2 billion over the next 6 years is going to be raised in our two most congested and populous areas in Virginia. And the first is the Northern Virginia region, which is outside of D.C. and really kind of the suburbs there. And they're going to see an additional $300 million annually that's raised just in that region from those taxes and fees that I list up there and can only be used for projects in that area. As the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, I have no say or control over that money. Those are completely controlled by what's known as the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, and they have the prerogative to select projects as they see fit to fund with those revenues, which was a key component of this package. Down in the Hampton Roads region, which is our second most populous area and the home of our port, which we're now number 3 behind Savannah, but we're hoping with a few years we might change that again. They have about $200 million annually that's dedicated to revenues down there. And again, the state has no control over those funds and how they might be used down there. They're controlled by the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission to be used exclusively for regional projects that the elected officials on that board select. Sir.
Tell me about the makeup of those commissions and how they're elected or appointed or whatever.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority is a commission, or authority, excuse me, that is made up solely of the chief elected officials from the Northern Virginia region. So there are 9 counties and cities within that area, and they compose of the elected body that votes on projects within that region. Now, they do have some weighted voting structure.
And to make sure I understood earlier, that money is used not only on state roads, but also local roads.
Yes, sir, and there's some nuances in Virginia. We maintain the bulk of roadways in the Commonwealth. So in cities, we don't maintain the local roads, but in counties, we do maintain the local roads. And our largest jurisdiction is actually Fairfax County, which has 1 million people, and it's urbanized.
That Clio there for that group, do they work on city, county, and state?
And transit, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up, is that also conterminous with the MPO?
In Northern Virginia, that is coterminous with the MPO, yes, sir.
Okay.
With the Virginia portion of the MPO. The MPO extends into D.C. and into Maryland.
Under Virginia's laws and Constitution, was the legislature able to impose this additional sales tax in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads without a local referendum, or was a local referendum required?
Mr. Chairman, no. No referendum is required under state law. These taxes were actually imposed by the legislature on these jurisdictions. We do have some nuances within our Constitution where you can't just say, this county, I'm imposing a tax, and so the General Assembly set out a set of criteria that if a given planning district commission met them, automatically certain taxes and fees were imposed. It just so happens the way the legislation was written, these were the only 2 planning district commissions that met those criteria.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary, how were these districts created? Were the legislature create them, or were they already existing other districts for another purpose?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, these were already pre-existing planning boundaries and jurisdictions that had been in place for a period of time, and the legislature merely relied on existing planning boundaries. And so again, one of the key things here is this is $2 billion of the total $6 billion that was anticipated to be, generated over this period, and it's raised just in these 2 regions and can only be used in these 2 regions. So generally, one of the other things I want to stress to you is here are the major revenues that support Virginia's transportation program. I'm not going to walk through all of these. The thing that I think is very important I want to stress to you all is it's a very, very broad base of revenues. And the reason that's important for us is different revenues react differently to changes in the economy. For example, vehicle registration fees, that's a very stable revenue source. Motor vehicle titling tax, that grows a lot when the economy is, humming along. It also drops precipitously when there's a slowdown in the economy. The general sales tax tends to grow, but at a much slower rate than the titling tax, but also doesn't decline as much during slower economic periods. So by having this broader base of revenue sources, it helps us kind of offset potential downturns in one revenue source or another, because typically when one goes down, another one's going up to a certain degree.
And I heard this number when we were up there in D.C., but I forgot it. What does that 0.9% general sales tax generate for y'all?
It's going to be on the next slide, but it's near $1 billion.
That's fine, yeah. Okay. So about $1 billion. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Virginia sales tax, or Virginia and local sales tax compared to surrounding states. How do you stand?
So the statewide sales tax is 5.3%, and in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads it's 6%, with those additional regional taxes. I believe that is on par or slightly lower than Maryland, and I believe is equivalent to that in North Carolina. But candidly, sir, I'm giving you my recollection. I don't recall the specifics at this time, but
so
that's what
overall competitive.
We're generally similar. Yes, sir. Now, we do have significantly, some of these other taxes are significantly lower, like our sales tax on gas and our motor vehicle titling fee. So all of those revenues are then deposited into two key funds for the most part in Virginia. And again, Mr. Chairman, you were asking about the retail sales and use tax. You can see that that's that low bar there. And again, it's about 920-some million, it looks like, looking at this chart. But we take all of these revenues and we put a certain portion of them in what's known as the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund. And I'm going to walk through that in a second. And we put the rest of that in what's known as a Transportation Trust Fund, which I'll also walk through. The other thing I'm going to highlight here is federal revenues are our single largest source, but even taking that out, we have 4 different other revenue sources that raise over $500 million to help us get to that $4.9 billion overall budget, which again I think is very helpful for the stability of our programming over the 6-year horizon periods that we use.
So what's your percentage between federal and everything else? What percentage is federal?
Overall, federal is about 20%, but when you look at enhancing the network, which is what federal funds are used for, it's about 55%.
So we're at 52, right?
Yeah. We're at 60.
We're 68.
Yeah.
68.
Well, but it's growing, unfortunately. So.
And so one of the things we do in Virginia is we have a rule. You fix it first. If you've built an asset in the Commonwealth, we are required by state law to make sure we take care of that before we take any money and use it to expand the system. So we have a Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund that's dedicated to this purpose, but if it's deemed to be insufficient to cover those needs, we take money each year out of the highway construction account and put it in there. And the kind of really basic principle is you fix a leak in your roof before you add a new den to the back of the house. It's just a physically responsible thing to do. Also within this, to help demonstrate to the legislature why this is important, is we report on our condition of our roadways and we set targets. And we tell you on an annual basis, our legislature, how we're doing and whether or not we're meeting those targets. And as you can see with the condition of our secondary roads, even when it's bad news, we report that information to folks and we try and explain what's happened and what corrective steps we're going to take to try and move that trend in the right direction. We also look at this at a geographic level. So this is condition of the interstate highways in Virginia. On average, 83% of our interstate lane miles are in good condition. If you take a look at this chart, you'll see that's not the same across the state. As a DOT executive, this is not a fun thing to show to your legislature, but showing this information is something that's been very helpful to us in working with them in creating a level of trust and accountability to move forward and see these new transportation revenues. So if you'll see District 6, which is the Fredericksburg area, its pavement's almost perfect. We've redone almost the entire Interstate 95 corridor running through that region. If you look at the Richmond district, only 75% of its interstate lane miles are in fair or better condition. And so this is the type of information we provide and then work to try and address these discrepancies. The other fund that I mentioned to the committee is the rest of these funds then flow into what's known as the Transportation Trust Fund. This is a multimodal pot of funds that is used to, in effect, expand and enhance the transportation system throughout the Commonwealth. So within this $1 billion fund, roughly, about 73% goes to highway construction, 22% goes to transit capital and operating, and another 5% goes to either aviation or port improvements. In addition to that fund, we also have $50 million approximately each year that's available to us to expand passenger rail service, both through capital and operating support, and another, this fund ranges about $23 to $30 million, depending on the year, that's available for freight rail improvements through our Rail Enhancement Fund, where we partner with Class 1 railroads and participate in projects, and they're required to pay at least 30% of a project's cost. And that final account you see there is our dedicated account to support our bonds and debt service that we issue on a revolving basis in certain instances. Now, one of the things we're currently undertaking, Mr. Chairman, is as a result of the increase in revenues that we saw in 2013, the governor and the speaker both came together this year and championed a legislative effort that requires our Transportation Policy Board in Virginia to develop a statewide prioritization process for these new funds. And so the rationale behind that is we need to demonstrate to the taxpayer that with the incremental new money we have, we are spending in areas that will get them the biggest bang for their buck. And the reason this was put in place is we wanted to demonstrate that we had a very accountable and transparent system to the public, to the local elected officials, and to the state legislators. So when they see 10 projects that we considered and the 5 that we picked, they know why we picked those 5 and why we didn't pick the other 5. And the reason I believe this is very important, Mr. Chairman, is the simple truth is most places do need to invest more revenue in transportation. But it's very unlikely that we'll ever have enough to build all of the worthwhile projects. And so in the Commonwealth, we believe it's very important that we put in place a process to best use the revenues that we do have. And so over the next year, we're going to be developing a process to screen capacity expansion projects and evaluate them. And the first thing we're going to do is see whether or not they meet a need that's identified in our long-range transportation plan. And then we're going to evaluate every single one that does using a set of 5 or 6 criteria, and those are the ones listed here on the board. And so at the end of the day, when this is fully in place by July of 2016, every new project that goes in our 6-year program is going to have a score next to it. And that score is going to tell you what we think that project does for congestion mitigation, what it does for economic development, accessibility, safety, environmental quality, and if it's in one of our large urban areas, coordinating transportation and land use and looking at infill and making trips shorter.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
So this prioritization process, will it apply to new projects or projects that are already in the queue as well?
That's a very good question. I'm going to go to my next slide. So this applies both to new projects, but also to projects that were in the program and not fully funded or through the environmental review process. So actually just last week, our Transportation Board took the hard step where we deallocated funding off approximately 60 projects, which was worth more than $400 million that were not fully funded in that program, and we've in effect pulled those projects out of the queue and say they will need to be reevaluated along with other candidate projects from across the state to determine whether or not they will get funding moving forward to move towards construction. We're currently in the process of developing this process. We hope to have it adopted by our Transportation Policy Board in this upcoming summer, and then we'll take the next year to implement that for the 6-year program that's considered by the board in early 2016.
The funding mechanisms are very intriguing and very interesting, and I'm really liking all this. The thing that's throwing me is we're really not comparing apples to apples with the way Georgia funds and the way Virginia funds as far as what we're funding. And so when you initially see $5 billion, my mind immediately compares to the 2.2 in Georgia, but then I realize our ports completely self-funded. We don't handle county roads. Is there any way, and I don't know if anybody from GDOT is, well, I know Josh is here, I would love at some point, or Toby, at some point to find a way to kind of break them out so that we could compare true lane miles and roads and bridges, if you will, to find out that, and again, use your, I'm just curious about that at some point. We won't get there today, but that would be helpful for me to do an actual comparison. I like the ideas, and that's great, but I'd like to see a little bit more, if we could get to that point, some apples to apples.
And if I'm happy to coordinate with whatever staff you have from GI here to try and put that together. The next thing I want to talk about is we have tried a lot of tools. We have worked on a lot of different things in Virginia, and so for a long time people said, you got to try public-private partnerships. They're going to really help. And they did really help. We have moved forward with more than $5 billion in public-private partnerships in the last 6 years. They've really helped us deliver some critical multi-billion-dollar projects that otherwise would not have been constructed in the Commonwealth. A few things, though, that I want to really impart on this committee is you can't resurface a road with a public-private partnership. You typically need to have some type of revenue stream there. And the other thing is this is a negotiation, and it's called a public-private partnership. There's 2 P's before we get to partnership. The first is public, and the second is private. Public money is needed to make these things work moving forward. The more money you can put in, the better a deal you can cut with the private sector. they'll enter deals with you where you don't have to put a lot of money in, but there's going to be all sorts of other strings attached, like don't widen the road next to this one, or other things like that that can have really unintended consequences. So I just throw that out there to you because that's some of the things we've struggled with as we've moved forward with our public-private partnership program. Yes, sir.
How much of your new capacity has been through P3s in the last since you?
It is in the double digits, sir, but I would say it's probably between 10 and 20%, and that's just me doing some back-of-the-envelope math in my head. It has been this way that we have delivered basically all the projects over $1 billion. It's our only real viable way to do that, because in all of those, we have ended up relying on tolling, and I don't see a way forward for us to move forward with these projects that are over $500 million without using tolling, at least in the Commonwealth.
And in those projects, what's been the state's portion?
And I'm going to walk through an example project here just to kind of show you that on the next slide. But the other thing I want to impart to you about public-private partnerships is the real benefit to the taxpayer is shifting risk. Shifting that revenue risk over to the private sector, particularly if it's a toll project, so that they take that. Now they're going to get rewarded, and they may make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they got to take that risk on before they can make that money. I think it's very, very important things for folks to consider. Also, these have really allowed us to leverage federal financing tools. We've leveraged more than $3.3 billion in TIFIA loans in the last 6 years, and $1.5 billion in private activity bonds from the federal government in the last 6 years. But here's one of the kind of key projects, and it's one of the ones that's held up across the country as a great example of a public-private partnership. And this is the 495 Express Lanes project outside of D.C. 495 is the beltway around the District of Columbia. It was the most heavily traveled road we had in the Commonwealth that had pretty miserable levels of congestion. And we entered into a public-private partnership with Transurban and Fluor construction companies for them to add 2 hot lanes in each direction along a 14-mile stretch of this roadway. It cost about $1.9 billion.
So you built these. You didn't take existing lanes. You built new lanes.
In this example, yes, we did build them. There's some other ones we're pursuing where it's a mix of converting and building.
Right.
There, but yes, we built. This is all new capacity in this particular example. It cost about $1.9 billion, and as you can see, there's the kind of funding stack, if you will, for this. About $600 million in TIFIA loans. Again, the private party is responsible for paying that back. There is no burden to the Commonwealth to make sure that that debt service is paid. The others, over $600 million in private activity bonds, same thing. Virginia, as the Commonwealth, has no skin in that game. It is not our problem if those bonds are not paid back. We did put in about $400 million in state funding, which I thought was appropriate in this example to get us the project that we needed to have. And then the private sector put in about $350 million of their own equity investment that is going to be in this project throughout the life of the agreement. One of the things I want to note for the committee is these lanes opened in 2012. Traffic has been significantly below what the projections were. And again, had this been a state toll road, that likely would have meant we would have had to dip into the Commonwealth's state transportation budget to help service these TIFIA loans and private activity bonds. However, that ended up being a responsibility of our private partner, and that's something that they've handled internally on their own. And I don't know what they've done, because again, that's their responsibility. I do suspect over the long term, this deal will end up working out for them. They've recently just bought down about $400 million of these private activity bonds and reinvested more equity investment in this project to demonstrate their strong commitment to this.
What's the prediction on why the traffic lanes were below original projections?
So you can ask 4 people in Virginia and get 5 answers to this question, but I'll give you just a few of them. The first is the traffic and revenue study, which is where you project traffic, was done in 2008 and 2007, right before the recession. And so I think there's some issues there that are still lingering in the Commonwealth that influence that. Another thing, candidly, that I think influenced it is the Beltway was under construction for 5 years or 4 years. That in itself created a ton of traffic headaches. So the second these new lanes opened up, it increased the capacity by 50% and eliminated all of the construction headaches of lane shifts and this, that, and the other. And so I think a lot of people were like, hey, this isn't so bad. in the regular lanes that weren't unmanaged because they had been experiencing something that was so much worse due to the construction. So part of it was that. But again, I do suspect over time they'll get back closer to their revenue projection, or not revenue, traffic projections that they'd had in place.
What was the term of this?
I believe this particular deal, Mr. Williams, was about 75 years, and that included the construction period.
So y'all put about 20% in.
Yes. We put $400 million about of $1.9 billion.
And who owns this one after 75 years?
This is a Commonwealth road that is currently being operated and maintained by the private sector. There are handback requirements. There are conditions about it being open. There are requirements about incident management and clearance of accidents. So we are really a management company in this particular thing, and we are managing a private contractor that has the responsibility, subject to penalties, to operate this roadway during that period of time, and they have to hand it back to us in good condition or be subject to additional penalties.
What's the average toll during rush hour?
Well, it depends how far you want to go there, but it can range. The other day I was driving Northern Virginia to our district office, and to drive the full 14 miles, it was like $12.65. To drive 5 miles on it, it was something like $6 or $7. And so it does fluctuate. It has no cap. The toll is put in place, and its entire purpose is to make sure that those lanes operate at 55 or 45 miles an hour, free flow, so that the carpoolers, the transit users, and the people willing to pay that have a reliable, speedy trip through the region. One of the other things we've done in Virginia is in 2011, we created a state infrastructure bank. We capitalized this with $250 million there, and we provided 3 loans and lines of credit to projects throughout the Commonwealth. And really, this is kind of like Virginia's own TIFIA loan program. We completely modeled it after the federal program. Folks have kind of showed an initial level of interest, and then there was a cooling off period, but we're starting to see more applications come back in for this infrastructure bank there. We're partnering with our local governments and the private sector where they have revenue-generating projects. And some of these projects have been property tax-based, and others have been tolls. So it does work for all sorts of projects and for different types of jurisdictions. Mr. Chairman, this is my second to last slide, and I just want to let you know, I told you we tried a lot of other things. Here are the other things we tried. We sold a ton of bonds, for state bonds. We then sold a ton of federally backed bonds. We tried doing design-build projects to cut costs and speed up delivery. These all helped, but they really just didn't get us over the hurdle of the things we needed to do. We do special assessment districts partnering with local governments. We do tax increment financing districts partnering with local governments.
Can you just give me a 60-second overview of your special assessment district?
So a special assessment district in the Commonwealth of Virginia is where the local property owners, working with the local board, vote to impose an additional tax up to a certain rate on the real estate within that given area.
Kind of like Forsyth.
Kind of like Forsyth County. Before you say it.
I have no idea what y'all are talking about.
Ongoing joke there.
Yep.
Nick, I'm sorry.
And then in the final bullet here is we also create a revenue sharing program where we partner with local governments on a 50-50 basis for projects up to $10 million in value on an annual basis, and local governments send in their funding request. Last year was about $160 million, and we matched that dollar for dollar to bring those projects to fruition. Again, these are just some of the examples of tools that we've used in Virginia, but they didn't do everything we needed. So just in conclusion, the task you have in front of you is an unenviable, difficult task, but I think it's worth it. One of the other things is in Virginia, we've really found that a broad-based revenue stream has been very helpful to the stability of our programming. Doesn't stop the fluctuations, it just helps mitigate some of the downturn in certain instances. The other thing is there's never going to be enough money. There's always going to be some projects that someone has that's worthwhile, and I highly encourage you to think about how do you start to evaluate and prioritize your projects here to make sure that any of your existing or potential new revenues are put to their best use. And the thing that's really been key to us in Virginia is we try and be as transparent and accountable to the public the local elected officials and the state elected officials as we can be. I showed you some of those charts on our pavement conditions. We also publish maps that show you segment by segment whether or not your road is in very good, good, fair, bad, or very poor condition for all of the major highways across Virginia. We publish maps with the location of the structurally deficient bridges. Soon we'll be publishing scores for our capacity expansion projects. We found that providing this information, while it's not always pleasant as a government official to the other branch of government, has been very, very helpful in our partnership and working with them. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
What was your makeup of your legislature and your governor at the time? Passage of this.
The Senate was evenly divided, 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats. The House was 66 Republicans and 34 Democrats. And the executive branch was a Republican Attorney General, a Republican Lieutenant Governor, a Republican Governor. Thank you.
What's your state income tax?
Our state income tax, we have 3 brackets. I believe the lowest one is at 3 and the highest one is 5.75.
When the bulk of the measures were passed, what was the political fallout from it, if any?
So I would say, and I'm just going to tell you what has happened. I'm not going to place any value judgments on it. Of the 65 House members that voted for the revenue package, something like it was evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. One was 33 and one was 32. None of the Democrats lost their seats. 4 Republicans lost their seats. 2 lost to Democrats. They were just in competitive districts, and the Democrats won the next go-around. There were several impending issues that were being faced there, including a private toll road that had some toll rate issues that was kind of unrelated to this, that became a dominant theme in that campaign. And then there's one other seat that was lost that some people have speculated was related to this.
So Ford in its entirety?
Ford's in entirety, and I would say that the 2 of them just were about the political dynamics of those particular districts where they switched from one party to another.
So maybe 2 related to the transfer station. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sure. One last question. Can you tell us a little bit about the state's role in transit and how that factors into the state makes your mix?
So the state invests approximately $500 million annually into transit, passenger rail, and freight rail. We have a Department of Rail and Public Transit at the state that is independent of the Department of Transportation. We do not run any transit. All of the transit systems are either locally or regionally operated. However, we do have a formula where we provide operating support as well as capital support to those agencies, and we also at times do flex some of our federal highway funds over to transit for kind of major expansions when they're viewed to have benefits for highway users.
We have a copy of the presentation, the numbers.
I will connect with your staff and make sure you get a copy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much. All right. Let's see. Who's the next contestant? Mr. Doc Kibler.
Are you guys okay? Would you like to stand up for a second and shake it out a little bit?
No, we actually know we want to keep rolling. We're going. This is it for us. And I live in South Georgia. It's a long way from Rome, Georgia.
I understand. My comments will be brief. I appreciate it. Economic development. That's really the crux. Again, I'm from the Rome area, the Chamber of Commerce, very avid member and supporter of the community. I left Atlanta in 1991 because for my salesmen, it took them from 2 to 3 hours in some cases to get from our office to their appointment. The traffic was frustrating, and so that brought me to Floyd County. After I moved here, I found out that it was also termed to be inside the ABC Triangle. Well, the only other triangle I know about is the Bermuda Triangle, so I thought, oh, no. But in saying that, when you look at the transportation corridors around Floyd County, we don't have an interstate that touches Floyd County. And the interesting part of that is that Floyd County, only behind Savannah and Atlanta, is in third place for the amount of materials coming through the Port of Savannah. It's interesting. Economic development. So what Chip Hood and I want to stress to you is that if we're given the opportunity to connect some of our major roads, then we can assist in some of the problems for the state and some of the problems for transportation. My wife has a restaurant. When times are tough, when you get your costs down as low as you possibly can by strong management and good decision making, the one thing that makes the difference is customers. The more customers we bring into Floyd County, Northwest Georgia, the state, the Port Authority, we're going to be more successful because there'll be more funds available. So, having said that, I'll go over 4 projects that we've got here that are important for us. For more than 25 years, our community has sought to obtain a direct connector from 411 to 75. Continual roadblocks have occurred to offset progress made for this crucial transportation project. Recently, however, there is new hope and a joint effort between Bartow County and Floyd County seeking the completion of this connector. The support has been shown from the Department of Transportation, the Governor's Office, Federal Highway. Progress is underway regarding studies right now. They're doing some more studies. Hopefully that'll be completed by April of this year. But as a community and in coordination with Bartow County, we've taken it upon ourselves to make the best argument we can make in D.C. We've flown up every year, sometimes more than one year, met with Federal Highway specific to this issue. There's an opportunity for us to bring a lot more commerce, not only as a result of added materials coming through Savannah, but to be able to connect better with Atlanta, Birmingham, and Chattanooga, again, bringing more revenue into the state. In our community, as it grows, our industries will be shipping more products to 75, and tourism traffic will increase. Some of the projects that we've taken on, again, to promote prosperity here without that connectivity is tourism. For example, we've just through the last SPLOST been able to afford the new Tennis Center of Georgia. They're considering different names for that right now, but it will be in excess of a $12 million facility that will bring folks in from the region, from the entire Southeast for tournaments. The Northwest Georgia has a medical community. We attract patients from the entire region. An education community hosting North Georgia Technical College, Georgia Highlands College, Shorter University, Berry College, and Georgia Regents University. Education, again, is a strong part of our pull. So in addition to the widening of 411, we have a major consideration to continue the good work we've done in the north part of our county, where we brought in Lowe's Distribution Center. Thanks to the good work that our legislators did and the funding opportunity, we were able to bring Lowe's to Floyd County. They have on their road, which they lay in the corner of 53 and 140. In that corner, just from that facility alone, they put 250 trucks on the road a day. They also have 70 in excess now of 700 employees at that one facility. At this single intersection, we have 3 other opportunities for very large facilities to come in. Now, again, what I stress is that for the last 30 years, these 2 road projects, we worked really hard and made hopeful promises to the people that have located here. They're domestic and international companies. We need to continue that work so we continue to grow, so that for a change we can turn the ABC triangle into a four-letter acronym that includes Rome. So help us with the good work you've done to bring all the transportation dollars to Floyd County, and let us help in the state's gain for economic development. I appreciate those are my comments.
Do you have any time for questions?
Sure.
Anybody?
We've got two other projects that we can go ahead and describe and then take the questions
Sure.
after that,
Chip?
if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and bring Chip up.
Okay.
And one question, did you address earlier what the local match was for that road project to tie into Interstate 75? How much did the local governments offer on that project?
Specifically for that one, and that's another good issue that we ran into in D.C. at the time, and hopefully still, we're able to get 80% of cooperating funding for the 411 connector. We don't know whether that's still available.
So were the local governments going to pitch in 20%?
Specific, no.
Okay.
We were looking for the state.
Okay. 80 federal and 20 from the state. Okay.
All right, well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a very loud talker as well. I run a landscaping company here called Forever Green. We employ about 35 people, so I've got trucks on the road. I'm also the chairman of the Airport Commission. I've worked with the Chamber on the Transportation Committee, and I'm on the executive board there. And then I've just been newly elected to the Floyd County School Board. So on behalf of Floyd County, we appreciate y'all coming, and if there's anything we can do for y'all, let me know. I'm going to be brief, but as Rome and Floyd County continue to grow and prosper, it's imperative that we provide a safe and efficient transportation hub for our citizens, students, and businesses as well. A portion of the Rome bypass has been completed. However, there's still pending sections of this connector that need to be expedited and completed. Our local transportation projects play as much of a role in the safety and efficiency of travel for our citizens as do the transportation roadways and for departing our community. The completion of the Rome bypass will allow truck traffic to bypass our downtown area, and y'all probably are aware, but which is the one we learned about this morning in the chamber? What news media? Rome was selected as one of the 10 best downtown cities in comparison with New Orleans and other cities. U.S. News. Improving and getting everything out of our downtown, improving safety. It will also allow more efficient travel for these freight carriers. And as Dr. Ross said earlier, if we get out of the way, the freight can move. Additional safety concerns have been expressed by our citizens, and that's another one of the projects that Doc and I are talking about is the State Route 101. This transportation artery is slated to be widened from Wax Road to Dean Avenue. But the majority of the accidents, including fatalities, are along a section that's further south than this. Further, bike routes are tentatively designed to be on this road, and we would like y'all to, the DOT, to look and see if that's another safety concern as well, unless this road is widened as well. We would just hope from here in Floyd County that y'all would expedite those as well. And that concludes my report. If y'all want to ask Doc and I some questions together.
I had one other question I failed to ask the previous speaker. What is the main product that you're exporting or importing into this county through the Port of Savannah?
I can yield to our chamber president behind you, but of all of the manufacturing companies, it's a wide range of products. Al, would you like to?
Certainly. We are the proud home of Pirelli, Suzuki, Southeastern Mills, so heavy metal, automotive parts. We have a number of international companies here from Japan, Belgium, Switzerland, South Korea, Italy, and so we're very active with both the exports and imports with the Port of
As well as carpet and automotive products that local companies provide.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Have we had Brian Anderson from the Dalton Chamber? He's not here. Well, we're almost finished. Miss Malika Rivers, Cumberland CID.
You asked when you were up. You're up.
That'll be it, except for HNTB, right?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Malika Rivers. I'm the executive director of one of the Atlanta Community Improvement Districts, or CIDs as we call them. It's the Cumberland Community Improvement District, and it was the first in the state of Georgia. Started 26 years ago, back in 1988, with some visionary leadership from then Johnny Isaacson, who was in the legislature at the time, and now there are about 20 CIDs around the metro Atlanta area alone. So we are pleased to have started a trend, if you will, where the business community understands that we also are part of the solution as well. You all, I'd like to preface my comments by saying that you all have such a great challenge ahead of you, coming up with solutions to how to meet a need that there isn't one solution for it. It's going to be a variety of different solutions, and as the Deputy Secretary from Virginia indicated, there's always going to be a need, but we have to try to meet those challenges. And in the spirit of starting my comments with the end in mind, this is the message that I'd like to leave with you. The business community is in it with you. You are not alone in it. In the case of my organization, we've been around for 26 years now, and we only exist in order to invest in public infrastructure. That's why the Cumberland CID exists. And we don't do it to be altruistic. We don't do it to be nice to anybody. We do it because it makes business sense for us. So I'll touch on all of those. But please do see us as a resource. Continue to see us as a resource, because we don't come to you asking for a handout. We come to you with money in our pockets that we bring to the table, and we use it to leverage against your funds. So with that, this is the district boundaries, and if you're familiar with where we are, we're in the Metro Atlanta region in the northwest quadrant. We're at 75 and 285, and you can sort of see the interstate system there. But Cumberland, in and of itself, is a major home to lots of corporate entities, and because of those corporate entities, including Home Depot, GE Energy, Weather Channel, Genuine Parts, and in 2017, the Atlanta Braves. We are already making an impact of being 5.4% of the state's total economy. So these concentration of business areas do make a difference, and they bring revenue to the table. Our property values at this point represent about $4.4 billion worth of property value. Almost $3 billion of that is in commercial property value. And in 10 years, we're projecting adding a lot more. In fact, about $6.7 billion worth of real estate assets in our community. So you can see that there are growth opportunities and also challenges that we also have to deal with. So who we are, again, I know that you've heard from other representatives of CIDs, and just to remind you, we're commercial property owners that tax ourselves. That's how we bring money to the table. But we tax ourselves, we bring this money to the table, and we jointly invest in public infrastructure. If you are a developer and you have developed a beautiful $100 million building, you need to make sure that people can access that site. Your tenants, your visitors, anybody that is important to you as a constituent and a stakeholder and a client and a customer needs to be able to access your facility. So public infrastructure is absolutely crucial for us because it means dollars for us in the long run. But we use this, again, we use this to leverage against your monies as well, because we don't own the public infrastructure. The state owns it, the county owns it, the feds own it, but we want to influence it, we want to invest in it, so partnering with you and leveraging our dollars together really creates that win-win. So I like to tell my story in pictures because, again, pictures tell 1,000 words. This is the Cumberland area, and again, 75 going north-south, 285 going east-west. This is a picture back in 1978. And on the lower left-hand side, you can see Cumberland Mall. It opened its doors up in 1973. So that was the state's first regional mall, and it really was a game changer for this little niche of the world here. But you can see various patterns of development, some commercial, some residential. Dobbins Air Force Base is just up 41, which, as you know, is a highway that's operated by the state as well. But this is what Cumberland looks like. And I would usually say now, but it's really not now, because with the announcement of the Braves, we have a whole different makeup of what this picture looks like. This is back in 2012, but it's really the best aerial that we've got to show you how the area has changed in terms of development in the community. We're very office heavy, we're retail heavy, so our sweet spot these days is adding on the multifamily and on the residential side, which really goes into creating a community that people can go to work, they can play. We've got national parkland right here, a direct access to national parkland, and it's they can see a show at the Performing Arts Center. They've got a variety of things to do. But let me take you through this picture and tell you how the CID, in partnering with its state and county partners, has really made the difference here. What I've just circled is what we call the Kennedy Interchange. Kennedy because it was named after a family that owned the land that sold it to the government that allowed us to build this interchange. This was the first project that the CID identified because that concentration of office buildings right in the core is the Galleria area. And there was no direct access to the Galleria off of 75. In fact, because we're cut literally into quadrants by 75 and 285, it was very difficult to get to this market. So creating direct access through that interchange was crucial. It was about $77 million, and the CID brought several million to that and was able to leverage that against public dollars. The next one is 41. That road has been widened over the years, and we're actually just south and off of this picture. We're investing another $50 million into reconstructing the bridge. It's going from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. This is a major state arterial. And most recently, we've put under construction an additional widening of 41 that goes just south of the mall. Another big project of ours was creating this loop road. I indicated that we had been cut into quadrants. So getting from the northwest quadrant to the southeast quadrant was quite a challenge for people in the area. So it took us 16 years and $300 million, again, in private and public investments to get this road built, and it's been a game changer for the community as well and sparked lots of development. So I can continue to put all these yellow lines all over the map, but in reality, I would have lines all over the place because there's literally no road in this community that hasn't been touched by the investment of the business community. But having said all of that, really, what does it do? And it means money. Again, I could put dollar signs everywhere that commercial and multifamily growth has come about over the past few years or is in the pipeline right now to come out of the ground, but I would cover the map with it. And all of this creates value in the community. We've gone from, we've created about $2.5 billion in real estate asset value over the past 26 years. And we're going to add another $2.3 billion in value in real estate assets over the next 10 years. So all of that translates into sales, it translates to property taxes, and all of the types of mechanisms and tools that you're talking about in your toolbox that can help raise the revenue in order to meet these infrastructure needs that you're talking about. So our partnership works, and one of the last presentations indicated that public-private partnerships may work some of the time. I would just indicate that this type of public-private partnership, in my 18 years of having worked at my CID, works all of the time. We can't take all of our money and solve all of the infrastructure needs, but we can certainly focus on some projects that make a big impact to each of our communities. So I've talked about increasing real estate value, but these are the dollars that are associated with the infrastructure investment. So 26 years in operation right now, we've put about $500 million in constructed real estate out into the market. About 100 million of that has been borne by the business community, and about 400 million of that has been borne by the public partners. Over the next 10 years, my back-of-the-envelope projection is in the $750 million range, about $500 million of that being for transit need. Cobb County has already scoped out a transit system to the tune of about $500 million, and it becomes an issue of how does it get paid for right now. The other balance, that $250 million, is my guesstimation of where we need to go with additional roads and sidewalks and paths and intersections and all types of infrastructure and multimodal infrastructure that we need. And how much of that is coming from the business community would be about $80 million. The question becomes, how do we take our $80 million and leverage it against the dollars that you bring to the table? Because again, we have money, we want to partner with you on it, but if we can't leverage our money against these outside sources, then we simply just won't use our money for it. So I definitely applaud the committee for coming up with revenue sources and that will be hopefully implemented that we can take advantage of together.
Ms. Rivers, before you move forward, can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
How much out of the $400 million you have there, county, state, federal, how much from the county, do you know?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I apologize, Chairman. And I will also say this, that back in the early 80s, the $500 million, $500 million, again, is an estimate at this point. I've had to cobble 26 years worth of 65 projects. That's been quite a task, and it continues on. So I haven't gotten it to the point of all of the various funding sources that came out of that. But I would say significant, of course. Cobb County has a SPLOST, a Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. It's been more or less in existence for about a 30-year period. There's been a couple of instances where the voters have not approved the SPLOST, but for the most part, Cobb has enjoyed this SPLOST, which has helped to generate revenue for transportation. Cobb is very progressive when it comes to transportation, and it's generated about definitely over $2 billion worth of funding sources for the county.
Thank you for coming. We've had some other folks from other CIDs come as well. One idea that was floated, I'd like to get your thoughts on it, which would be to allow the different CIDs to pool money to help create express bus service between two different CIDs. For instance, Cumberland to Perimeter, and also to then connect up with Malta in terms of connecting with the North Fulton CID as well as the Midtown and Buckhead CIDs, and also the CIDs over in Gwinnett County. and with the idea being that these various business centers could use greater connectivity in terms of getting people from one part to the other. Would that be something that y'all would be interested in?
Well, I think certainly all ideas are on the table. Because Cumberland was the first at pioneering the business model of a CID, it was the state legislature and some private visionaries that put the enabling legislation in place. But our model has always been about leverage. We don't really pay for anything at 100%.
So I know that. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm not even speaking of 100%, just in terms of you being able to leverage each other's money and also working with the state. That's what
I think so. Our model has been against public funding, but to leverage against other sources is something that can definitely be innovative for all CIDs around Georgia and the metro area specifically. I think the opportunity exists. There's a little bit of a nuance that would have to be addressed in that my CID exists in 6-year lifespans. Every 6 years we go out of business unless my commercial property owners choose to extend. So they have to go through that voting process. Because of that, we are not allowed to encumber ourselves with any funding burdens beyond the existing term. Other CIDs have sort of flip-flopped that. They continue on unless their board chooses to go out of business. So, things like that could certainly be addressed, but I think all revenue opportunities and partnerships could certainly be on the table.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Rivers, 2 quick questions. One is we're in the process of voting, or our property owners are voting for our CID, which will abut the North Fulton there at McGinnis Ferry and 400. And you mentioned yours is every 6 years. Here's the question. Does yours disband after 6 years if they don't renew it, or does it automatically renew if they don't?
Cumberland goes out of business unless the board chooses and the membership chooses to continue on. Other CIDs have taken the opposite approach.
Well, no, ours is going to be set that it will automatically disband unless you can track all the owners down, and that's where, so that they vote to renew it for another 10 years. The other thing that there's been a question of the attorneys have raised based on when the CID legislation was done, is a question of, back in the early days, you talk about mixed use. Mixed use really weren't in the, and so there's a question as to what do you consider a mixed use property that contains both residential as well as commercial? How are y'all addressing that within your CID?
Right, so the enabling, you brought up a concern that everybody discusses, and where we are in that discussion, it differs across the CIDs. And for the benefit of everybody else in the room, the enabling legislation only requires commercial property owners that have a commercial use to pay the tax. It's voluntary for any business area to come together to create the CID and then allow themselves to be taxed for that 6-year period or whatever. But to your point, if the use is a residential use, then it's not taxed. Because multifamily, definitely in Cumberland and in just about every concentrated area, is seeing a lot of growth in multifamily. Those are users that are using the infrastructure. So the argument on one hand is should they pay also. I think there's an opportunity. Clearly, the enabling legislation would need to be changed. It would change the makeup of each of our governing bodies. And I think there are pluses and minuses associated with both of that, and I've heard them on both sides of the aisle, if you will. I know that our model right now works, but I also know that because multifamily is being added and we get wonderful benefits from that, on the other hand, it's also eroding, if you will, our tax base and our ability to fund infrastructure. So I think it needs to be addressed. I think the opinions vary across the board on it. So.
All right.
I just have one more slide.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to
That's okay. But it's always about not so much what have you done for me lately, but what can we all do together. And in Cumberland's case, We can continue to build the roads, bridges, and interchanges that we have traditionally built over the years. You know, there is always going to be a need for that. And when you're in a market like mine that has grown up in a suburban context, you have big blocks, we call them super blocks, and it's difficult to walk around. And the more you can break that apart, in order to create development opportunities, it also means that we need additional roads in our areas. So we continue to have that need in Cumberland. But a big need that we also have is transit. Transit is absolutely critical to the Northwest Corridor. You know, for as large as Cumberland is, we're the only major market in Metro Atlanta that isn't on a regional transit system right now. We have bus, we've got local bus, we've got express bus. We connect that way, but we are not connected to the regional transit system. And from an economic development standpoint, that is a huge detriment to us. We heard earlier about the millennial generation. The millennials are bigger than the baby boomers, and they don't ask for things, they demand things. And they are absolutely changing the face of development and real estate as we go forward. And if we don't meet the types of communities that huge generation is demanding, then we are going to miss out on growth. And missing out on growth means that our economic engines are threatened. And nobody at the local level or at the state level wants that to happen. And lastly, all of this infrastructure, it simply means development. It means jobs. It means the ability to create revenue sources, property taxes, sales taxes, and other types of opportunities that will help with all of these needs. So with that, if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to take them, but it's been a pleasure to be with you here today.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question. Just for clarification, the multifamily, I'm assuming apartments and things like that, just for clarification, are they considered commercial uses? They're not?
They are not.
And that's a statutory?
Correct.
Okay. Remind me, what is the percentage of businesses that's needed to give you that critical threshold to form a CID? And is that statutory or constitutional?
It's not a number. The threshold is more subjective to the community. Many CIDs are large, and they have a lot of land mass that is commercially taxed. We like to use the word assessment because we don't like to use the word tax. But I know other CIDs that are very small in terms of their land size because they were only able to get a certain amount of folks. But really, the litmus test is you need a simple majority of property owners that represent 75% of the assessed value. That's what you need to have. So whether that's 5 miles or 2 miles or 100 miles, that's not the issue. It's 51% of the owners representing 75% of the assessed value, and then they need to be contiguous, and that's how you draw your lines. In Cumberland's case, we've actually expanded about 4 different times, but you have to do that, again, meeting that litmus test of 51 and then the 75.
And that's statutorily established, or is that constitutionally established?
That is a good question. And Brandon, you might know Senator, you might know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't think it's constitutional.
Yeah.
But I do know that she's right on the 75% of the assessed value. So if you have 100 commercial property owners, you have to get 75% of the assessed value. And you usually can get that pretty easily. Then you got to go get 51 owners.
50 plus 1.
50 plus 1. And when you do that, then you can sweep the rest of them in. So that's how it's. I think that's just.
Yeah. I think it was set up that way in the enabling legislation.
Right. I think it was in the legislation.
Yeah.
It has to be that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one of the requirements you don't have a choice on.
Yeah.
But I guess just you all can change that statutorily. I guess that's the.
That would have to be changed, yes.
Yeah.
And that was.
And by the way, if you own 5 different non-contiguous pieces of property, you're one owner. You're not 5.
I mean, Tom, we just opened a $600 million investment called Avalon, and it's got office, retail, restaurants, and so on. It's heavily commercial, but there is also 105 single-family homes, 200 townhomes, and then there's 400 apartments that are owned by North American Property. So you could argue that they're a corporation that owns those 400 apartments. Should they be taxed, but not the townhomes and the single-family homes that are really truly residential? That could be argued. I'm not advocating that, but you could say North American Properties is a commercial owner of those 400 apartments in some ways.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Rivers, any other questions? Any questions?
I'd just like to compliment Malika and Cumberland for the example they created that's the reason we have so many CIDs and the great job y'all have done over the years.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Rivers. Appreciate you. All right. We are down to our last speaker, Ms. Kelly Kemp.
Good afternoon now.
Yeah.
So, I'll try not to take too much of your time. I know you're getting hungry, but we do have some good information here for you. While they're uploading the updated PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Kelly Kemp. I'm with HNTV Corporation. I'm an Associate Vice President and Group Director of Planning Services in our Atlanta office. We've been around celebrating 100 years this year as a transportation infrastructure firm, and we've been in Georgia for almost 50 years. We were asked by the Metro Atlanta Chamber to work closely with them to develop a primer for you guys to answer 2 questions. Thank you. So, we've been working closely with the Metro Atlanta Chamber as well as Ernst & Young. I want to mention them as well. And they have been helping us with demonstrating the economic benefits of investing in transportation and what makes cities economically competitive. So let's see here. Here we go. So we're answering 2 questions. We know that you guys are here to answer how we're going to fund the funding gap, and that's obviously a huge challenge. What we've been asked to do is to answer what is the funding gap based on existing documents that are out there already. We're not reinventing the wheel. And why is it important to invest in transportation, that economic return on investment? So none of these numbers should be new to you. I think a lot of you have already seen that historically the state has invested $2.2 billion a year in transportation. And we are going to be focusing on state expenditures primarily today. 2.2 billion, 1.2 in federal, and 1.0 billion in state funds. And this just shows a breakdown of what the state intends to spend, how they intend to spend their money over the next 4 years as part of their current state transportation improvement program. You'll notice about 40% in capacity, 12% in maintenance and safety, 17% in bridges. So we've assembled from a variety of reports, plans, and documents several statistics. Some are new that you haven't seen. Some are just shown in different ways that you've seen before. But when we compare to our peer states, 18% of our funds has been dedicated to debt service, the highest among our peer states, as you can see here. Also, if you look at, and I know Commissioner Golden has conveyed this to you as well, but when you look at our per capita or our per mile expenditures of compared to our peer states, we are investing the lowest in our capital maintenance expenditures per mile, as much as, let's see here, I think it's just under $14,000 per mile is what we spend. But if you compare ourselves to Florida, they're spending almost $123,000 per mile, just to give you a comparison. The other thing that I wanted to note is that last year, the state of Georgia resurfaced about 2% of the roads. This year, it could be as little as 1% of the roads. That's a 50 to 100-year cycle of resurfacing the roads when it should really be somewhere around 7 to 15 years. The goal is every 15 years. After about 7 years, the roads degrade so much faster that it becomes a lot more expensive to do that resurfacing. So that's another issue with the aging infrastructure. We did meet with a variety of state agencies across the state, including GDOT and others, as part of this effort. And aging infrastructure was a big priority in that operations and maintenance. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is, what are the probable outcomes if we don't invest more? And this comes directly from the statewide strategic transportation plan that the state put out a few years ago. But, we know that there's going to be a major negative impact on labor pools if we can continue investing at current levels. There will be significant impact on our supply chains, and they will erode with moving freight and goods. The number of people that can reach their jobs within 45 minutes will shrink significantly, again, shrinking those labor pools and deterring employers from locating here in Georgia. MARTA, for example, and this would apply to a lot of the transit systems across the state, would actually have to cut their operations by 30 to 50% if current funding levels exist. They just can't even maintain their existing systems, let alone expand. The congestion cost in Atlanta per capita would double over time, and the traffic growth on the interstates would increase significantly, and the capacity would just not be adequate. So what we're showing here is based on current spending levels, that really only leaves the state with $12 to $15 billion over the next 20 years, and that actually was from 2010 to 2030, I believe, so we're already in 4 years, left to spend on capacity. And of that, about 54% is attributed to, or would be contributed to Atlanta mobility, 43% to the rest of the state, and then 3% for freight mobility. And then what we show here is that if you break out the, say, for instance, the freight transport, about 35% of that would be for the port that last mile connectivity, and then the remaining 65% for interchange improvements. So that 12 to 15 billion over the 20 years, that's after you take out debt service, operations and maintenance, and all that. That's all that's left over that 20-year period based on historical levels. So this is probably the most important slide that you're going to see. If there's anything you take away from this presentation, it'll be this slide here. We looked at all the plans and documents out there now, and we came up with 3 scenarios. The first scenario was a system preservation scenario. If all we did was maintain our existing system at the levels that we need to be maintaining, and that's actually maintaining our critical infrastructure, not everything, but critical infrastructure, there's actually a funding gap of 1 to 1.5 billion per year. Okay, so that's just maintaining our existing system. If we looked at just critical needs for the state, so what the state has indicated as critical needs, it's a 2.1 to 2.9 billion funding gap, and that includes maintaining those as well, so that folds that in. If we looked at the full universe of needs that everyone has stated in their plans that they want to do, and we know that that may not be realistic, but if you look at that, then we're looking at 3.9 to 5.4 billion funding gap. We know that that may not necessarily be something that we could.
Could you go? Could you? Yeah. The old man back here can't read the screen, so could you read those numbers out loud again?
Yes. So for system preservation, for system preservation scenario, maintaining our existing system, that's 1 to 1.5 billion funding gap above and beyond what we're already spending per year. Okay, that's no new capacity.
Are we going to get this?
Yes. Yes. Okay. We're also, by the way, putting together a 10-page brochure with a lot of the same information that you'll be getting in the next couple of weeks from the chamber. So the critical needs scenario, which includes system preservation as well as expanding on our interstates and our infrastructure across the state, but it's primarily along interstates, is 2.1 to 2.9 billion per year, additional money needed. If we funded everything under the sun, universe of needs, everything that's been documented, state-funded projects that people have indicated they would like to fund, that's 3.9 to 5.4 billion per year. So really, that system preservation, critical needs area, somewhere in between there, that's where we need to focus. On the right-hand side, what we're just showing here is how those funds are distributed among different categories, infrastructure categories. So you can see the two orange bars in the middle. The orange bars are the system preservation scenario. So that's just bridge repair, replacement, and maintenance and safety. That's all that is, that 1 to 1.5 billion in the system preservation scenario. It's not funding anything else. And then in the critical needs, which is the dark blue bar in the middle, it's the same for bridges and maintenance and safety, but then we add in interstate capacity projects, regional mobility, some intermodal and interchanges. But a lot of that is focused, that additional capacity is widening interstates throughout the rest of the state. And then the full university needs includes a whole bunch of stuff in the across all categories in the light blue. So this is the key takeaway. Yes?
Two questions. I've been saying earlier, minimum 700 million. So what you're telling me, that's not even a minimum. Really, 1 billion is a minimum. And then the second question, you may not be able, that may be more encompassing than this, or I may have missed it in another room. You're in the transportation consulting business. Give me some credible way to show that this is not, no offense to you or HNTB or anything, that this is not an industry-driven reason to raise capital projects that do that, that we've got the verifiable showing of what actually is going to happen if we don't do this.
Right.
Are you
so
going to get to that at some point?
Yeah, and I can attempt to answer that question now as well.
I know Arthur Anderson, maybe, is that going to be part of today also?
Yeah, well, but I'll go ahead and answer your question. Hopefully it'll be sufficient. A couple of things. First of all, we did not recreate or modify any needs lists. We took the statewide transportation plan, the statewide strategic transportation plan, ARC's plan 20, the Atlanta Regional Commission's plan 2040, as well as the MARTA expansion plans, a whole bunch of the state freight and logistics plan. We looked at all of those and came up with the totals. We also met with all the different agencies to find out what they deemed their critical needs. So we were not defining what those critical needs were. We took cost estimates that were already available or in spending levels that were already available in those documents. So it was just a matter of putting them into their respective categories and adding them up. The other thing I just want to note as far as H&TB is concerned, we are a transportation solutions infrastructure firm. But, we do planning, design, environmental. The 1 to 1.5 billion for operations and maintenance, we don't really do much with that. So, yes, we are an infrastructure firm, so obviously we have a vested interest. But we're not going to get much out of it.
It was meant to be a friendly comment. I'm just saying, I know I don't doubt the numbers, but I have people back home.
Sure. Yeah. And then the other thing I just want to mention is that we did, for that being one of the reasons, we also made sure that we involved Ernst & Young as well, an independent company, to help us with this as well. We're doing a lot of the research. And what we'll get to soon is a survey that they did with the Urban Land Institute that talks a lot about the economic competitiveness and return on investment as well, and what folks are interested in based on different surveys. So I hope that sufficiently answers your question. And again, we'll provide this to everyone. So that kind of parlays me into the next slide of what drives real estate investment. And again, we worked with Ernst & Young, and every year they do an annual infrastructure report with Urban Land Institute. And their most recent one, the chart over here to the left, talks about the percentage of survey respondents that have placed a high priority on public transit services, roads and bridges, and pedestrian infrastructure when they're making decisions on site location and where they're going to locate their businesses. And that's important as employers, but also for their labor force, as well. We also have a statistic here, coincidentally, from the Metro Atlanta Speaks survey that the Atlanta Regional Commission, when Doug Hooker got up here earlier, he had mentioned that 70% of survey respondents thought improved public transit system was very important to Metro Atlanta's future, and so we have that included here as well. So given that, we just thought, you've heard a lot about the importance of investing in transit today, and for attracting businesses and labor pools in the millennials and aging population. And so we thought it would be important to kind of bring that to your attention as well. There have historically been state funding limitations for transit, and so as a result, they are underrepresented right now. When I showed those categories of distribution of how the funds have been spent, because state funds have not many state funds have been spent on transportation, they are somewhat underrepresented. So the current funding levels, or historical funding levels, not only will not allow transit to expand in Georgia, but won't even be able to maintain them in their existing state. And just as an example here, as far as the costs and what would be needed, with MARTA, there's three major, and this is just one example, three major expansion projects in Metro Atlanta: Clifton Corridor, Georgia 400, and I-20 East. And those three projects together range somewhere between $3 to $4 billion in costs in their entirety, which translates to about $120 to $160 million a year. So just for those three projects. So just to give you kind of an idea of what that would cost. And so the local funding just isn't going to be sufficient. So there needs to, as the needs of the state evolve, the distribution of funds needs to evolve as well, of how we spend our money. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the return on investment, what you get for your dollar. For every dollar that we spend in Georgia on transportation, we can expect a return somewhere between $4 and $8. So what we did here was we looked at the three different investment scenarios: the system preservation, so that maintenance scenario, through the year 2050. So if we looked out about 35 years, that total investment would be about $37 billion, which would return about $149 to $290 billion in economic benefits. That's additional jobs, GDP, a whole host of things, reduced congestion costs, supply chain benefits, et cetera. If you look at the critical needs through the year 2050, that would cost about $71 billion. We would return about 286 to 558 billion. And then obviously, if we were to fund that full universe of needs, it gets significantly higher. We also looked at jobs. And so here we just show that if we looked at critical transportation, the critical transportation scenario, we could actually generate about 340,000 jobs through the year 2050. That is based on a job years analysis that the Tiger grants with the feds, they have some guidelines that they include for every every billion invested, 13,000 job years are returned, and so we converted that to employees through 2050. If you just do the maintenance or the system preservation scenario, that's about 100,000 jobs. So it's still a significant amount. And that includes both direct, indirect, as well as induced jobs. And so again, we were here to help answer the what and the why. But obviously, you guys have the challenge of answering the how, which is the most difficult part, obviously, and I don't envy your position. And so we understand that you guys will hopefully find this information helpful. We'll provide it to you. There will be a very similar report that really shouldn't have any new information above and beyond what you've seen here today that we'll provide as well in the coming weeks through the Chamber, the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And then just one consideration, or a couple of considerations we have here going forward. Once funds are identified, then there's the decision on how to spend those funds on what types of projects. So I had mentioned earlier return on investment between $4 and $8 or $4 and $7.80 per dollar spent. dependent upon the mix of the projects, how you spend that money will yield you a higher return on investment. And part of that as well for consideration is just making sure that you have transportation options for both employers as well as their labor force. So that's it for me. Any questions?
Any questions?
I want to ask if I missed, when you said 340,000 jobs over the next 36 years, is that what you said?
Yeah, through 2050. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, we're now at the point. Does anybody else wish to speak?
Yes, sir. Unless you brought something.
Hey, donuts,
quick.
You know, it's close to lunch. Did you bring us any donuts?
Any donuts?
Anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, with that introduction, for those that are not past users of donuts, I'm Jim Tudor, and I'm president of the Georgia Association of Convenience Stores. And for the last 28 years, I've had the pleasure of working with Chairman Smowery and others for shorter periods of time. I've been around the gasoline business for 39 years. GACS represents the convenience store industry in Georgia that employs about 65,000 Georgians. But I want to talk to you today, and I want to leave behind with you, because I want to talk to you about 9,000 Georgians. And they're the ones that work in the gasoline stations that are along the borders of Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina. You know, we in the gasoline business don't really set public policy. We collect taxes. But we are impacted by tax policy that doesn't recognize that it doesn't stop at the border. 80% of all gasoline in the United States is sold through a convenience store. The challenge we have, as I have listened to this, and the beauty of next year being my last year at the General Assembly, is it provides a certain amount of candor flexibility. It's been very interesting as I've gone to many of these sessions where everybody talks about solutions but don't let us be part of it. The challenge we have is if you go forward and you're looking and you're looking at pricing. I'm not going to tell you about boogers and haints in Atlanta. A gas tax increase is a pass-through expense in Atlanta. It is. It's not a pass-through in Columbus. It's not a pass-through in Savannah. And it's certainly not a pass-through in Augusta. You need to look at these numbers. You know, we don't have a gas tax price problem in Georgia. Y'all know that. We have a problem in terms of how we spend the money that we tax on gas. You know, in my home county of Newton, great county, neighbor to my friend from Walton, we built a jail on money we collected on gas. We built a courthouse. We built a new judicial center. And now we're building a nice miracle field for disadvantaged kids. They're great projects. But that 3 cents a gallon we collect in Newton County we compete with that. So that's the challenge you face. The challenge you face is that you need $1 billion. Well, in order to get $1 billion, if you give them back the 180 million, if you do the math on the 5.6 billion gallons we sell today, then you need an extra 15 cents a gallon. That's what you need. Take 15 cents a gallon and lay it over the 45 cents a gallon right now that we're paying in total taxes. That's going to put Georgia right at 60 cents total taxes. Now, I want you to look at that number, and then I want you to look at the surrounding states. Look at South Carolina at 35 cents a gallon. Would you like to have a station in Augusta where you're at a 25 cent a gallon disadvantage? Or even in Columbus, or even along the Tennessee border? And we'll even be higher in Florida. I didn't think we'd ever get there. That's the challenge we face as marketers. We compete, you know, when the person pulls up to our pump, there's not a sign that says, well, 3 cents of this went to pay for a Miracle Fuel and 6 cents went to pay for that. They just look at the total price, and gasoline is extremely competitive. So I say that to you only in the fact that my responsibility is not to tell you the sky's going to fall. That's not what I'm here for. But I am saying that there are a lot of folks along Georgia's borders. This is a border issue when you start talking about that. And it just becomes a question of, you have the data there. You now know how we compete, real numbers. And so the question is for the folks that are along Georgia's borders. And, you know, even if I give you you take the 15 cent and you got your $1 billion, which you won't get because gasoline demand's already going down. We're down 3% this year. I'm sure at previous seminars, I think I've been to 5 of these. I must have missed this one. You're all aware of the fuel standards for 2025 that was adopted that are going to require a 60% increase in fuel efficiency for cars and a 51% increase in fuel efficiency for light-duty trucks. That's in the next 10 years. The average fleet economy in 2025 now has to be 54.5 miles per gallon. That's the requirement. Well, during that same period of time, the EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration, they say that we're going to have a 27% increase in total cars. That is 27% more cars, but those cars are going to get 50% less gas mileage. Well, you know, fuel consumption is going to continue to go down. Now, our industry we already know that. That's why you see stations that are being built today that are going to be less dependent on gas. That's why you see stations that are being built that are bigger. They have more food service because gas will become a commodity. It'll become and if you're in business today and you're depending on gas, paying the bills long term, sell your station now while it still has value. And that's just the reality. So I say all that to you that I don't have an overall solution other than to share the numbers so that you know as you move forward and you know, as I've looked at this committee and the hard work that you're doing, you know, I'm reminded that no good work goes unpunished. And whatever you do, there's somebody that's not going to get what they want. They're not going to get all the money they want. And nobody wants anything to come out of their pocket. But the reality is that if you look at the total tax we pay on motor fuel in Georgia, it's higher than almost all of our neighbors. Our diesel tax is right at the national average, and it's significantly higher than South Carolina, and it's even now what Florida is. So we do compete. Georgia is a little bit unique. It's not like Florida. You know, Florida's big cities, they face the water. You know, they don't have to worry about, you know, Tampa doesn't worry about what Georgia does on motor fuel. Miami doesn't. But I guarantee you Columbus does. And I guarantee you Augusta does. Not as much in Savannah, because if you've driven across the bridge, there's not a lot on the other side. Maybe someday there will be. But right to now, you're just going to see a lot of South Carolina swamp. But I guarantee you, Reverend Smiley was here, easy access to Columbus, easy access to Augusta, easy access along the whole border with Alabama, West Point. We compete all over that street. And if you don't think that for 10 cents a gallon or more that people are just going to drive across the bridge, then you haven't been in our business, because it happens to us every day. What our people get concerned about is not only do you take that gasoline purchase, but you take the market basket, because the customer is not going to make 2 stops. So when they stop for gas, so there are other losses there. you've got tough decisions to make. You know, it's. I wish I could tell you it was going to be easy. I'll be with you this session to watch how you come about it. But the reality is, please remember the number 9,000. I equate that to 4 Kias. There are 9,000 people that could be negatively impacted if, by public policy, we decide that there's somewhat collateral damage in some sort of great crusade. And I hope that's not the case. But that's all. I know you want to eat lunch.
Question.
I do have a question, if it's okay.
Sure.
And we've had several discussions on this, and I look forward to gaining 10 pounds over donuts starting in January. But the fuel consumption,
yes,
and we know that it's been going down.
Yes.
Projected to go down, and
yes.
I guess in October, even when prices had dropped dramatically, consumption still went down.
That is correct.
That would indicate we're probably even continuing to grow at a faster rate, which means that any fuel tax associated with that is going to be a declining thing. One of the, when we were in Augusta, we heard a presentation, and I asked a question, and I'm not sure really it was answered, but I'm going to ask you this same question.
Absolutely.
Or try to remember back. What's the thought or the possibility, or does it make any sense at all, whether it be across all 159 counties or whether it be in the border counties or something, offering a flexibility for the local government to be able to determine as to whether, and what I envision is they have an opt-in, opt-out opportunity. If they want to tax on motor fuel in Columbus, then they have to opt in to do that, and that money has to be spent on transportation. Or if they choose to lower their effective gasoline price to support the gas sellers in Augusta and make it up someplace else, they're willing to do that. What about the opportunity of truly giving that local government the option? You know, we talk about local control, but give the local government the opportunity to make that business decision.
Well, certainly, that's it. At the end of the day, our concern is not how you split the pie, but what's the total price and how we compete there, Mr. Chairman. And you know, as you know, when we did the T-Splosh, motor fuel was not in that, and there was a reason. Was the fact that you create competitive areas where if one area adopted and another one didn't, and you had it on motor fuel, you automatically gave one area 4 cents a gallon or more cost advantage, which in our business is the profit. So to the extent that that things could be done in those communities that would have less impact on the cost differential, that's something that I can't speak for our county folks, but certainly the reality is that we charge it on motor fuel right now, and because of that, regardless of how it's spent, it's in the total price that we compete in.
Anybody else?
Thank you, and hope to see you soon.
And thank you for what you do for us. We do appreciate you. Anybody else that wishes to be heard? Speak now or forever hold your peace. With that being said, I want to thank all the members of the committee for putting up with us, as well as for taking the time to travel around the state and listen to the people. As we've said, you know, we were looking for a 20 to 30-year plan, and we've got some tough work ahead of us. We've had words described lately: big, bold, aggressive. So we'll see, but we are going to try to come up with a comprehensive plan that will take us 20, 30 years out. We thank y'all, local delegation, for hosting us here today. We thank y'all for coming out as well. We thank Rome, Georgia, for your hospitality. Mr. Chairman, you got anything else you want to say?
No, you said it all. But thank you all, and we'll.
You said you didn't have anything else
We'll
to
look
say.
forward to we'll look forward to January with everybody.
Thank y'all. We're adjourned.